Hey everyone, welcome to a very special edition episode of Let Me Tell You Why That's Bullshit, Canadian Election. I'm your host, Nick.
And I'm German.
And this week we're rolling up our plaid sleeves and diving deep into the political maple syrup pit that is the 2025 Canadian federal election. We're talking about the debates that happened last week that looked like an awkward family dinner that contained housing numbers no one can agree on. We're breaking down what actually happened, not what politicians say happened. Spoiler, they were all full of bullshit. We'll talk about the Jekyll and Hyde act of Pierre Poilievre, Mark Carney's turn as Canada's calm dad, Jagmeet Singh's desperate pitch for the NDP to remain relevant, the housing exchange that turned into a math off from hell, and a healthy dose of fact-checking yourself before you wreck yourself. Let's dive in.
We have some very strong opinions and ideas, and I think we'll probably state those opinions now.
Okay. Morning, German. How are you?
I'm good. Morning, Nick. How are you?
I'm good. I spent a lot of the weekend prepping for this.
That's always good when you have the host who's prepared.
So we're in for a little bit of a long one. For our regular listeners, I am going to put this all up probably as like one video that you can just listen to. But for everybody else, we're going to break this down into little mini episodes as we talk about the debate kind of section by section. So first, I want to dive right in. So first, I think what I'm going to do is we're going to just watch a quick highlight here of, can't talk and share at the same time. There we go. We're just going to watch this like really quick highlight reel of the whole debate before we sort of move in section by section. Where did it go? Okay. One of those days.
You can't hear it, Nicole.
Leaders saying one thing in French and another one in English.
While these two compete about who's more pro-pipeline, I think what we need to do is, it's clear. The Liberals bought a pipeline. They built a pipeline. I don't know what Pierre is complaining about.
You can't do something and the opposite, and you can't fill people's mind with nonsense.
Mr. Poilievre, you spent years running against Justin Trudeau on the carbon tax, and they're both gone. Okay, they're both gone. And we're in a new
impersonation of them with the same policies tonight.
Very different.
Justin Trudeau's staffers are actually here with you at this debate in Montreal, writing the talking points that you are regurgitating into the microphone. How can we possibly believe that you are any different than the previous 10 years of Liberal government?
25 seconds left in this segment for you to respond to that.
Look, I do my own talking points. Thank you very much.
Will you look at the camera in the eye and apologize to the many people who suffered as a result of the inflationary policies that you advised Justin Trudeau to implement?
You know, I said earlier, but I'm going to say it again. I know you want to be running against Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau isn't here.
Okay, those are just...
So that sort of sets the tone for what we can expect from the debate. One of the big things that came out of it as kind of like an intro, let's just talk about sort of who is trying to do what. So Pierre Poilievre was trying to do this sort of like soft rebrand. He really wanted to sort of give off this, I guess like being human is the best way to say this. A much softer, more prime ministerial, less attack doggy persona of his. He managed to stay, I don't know how much of the debate you managed to watch this weekend, German, but he managed to keep his cool pretty much through the whole thing. He interrupted people almost as much as Singh, but managed to kind of like stay cool instead of losing it like he's been known to do in the past. Mark Carney basically kind of walked into the debate looking like he almost wanted to moderate it himself. Sort of the best way I could think to explain. He never interrupted anyone, and in fact, the closest he came was in that clip when Poilievre had said like, they're writing your talking points, and he wanted to be like, I write my own talking points. That was sort of the closest I saw in either debate of him coming to interrupt anyone. But he was like super passive, very like dad-like, and sort of that like boring politician everybody wants to see right now. Jagmeet Singh was basically hanging on for dear life. I'm going to keep it sharing because we're going to go right into more clips. So Jagmeet Singh was very like desperate. He kept interrupting everyone, as we'll see. We'll play a clip later. The French debate actually cut off his mic at one point because he wouldn't stop. And I think that was just, he was really trying to get it home that like, if you want to keep the liberals in check, you need to send us to Ottawa because we're the ones that got things like better healthcare and dental. So I don't know. What did you actually I will stop. What did you think like out of the debate that you did see, articles you read, that clip?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack in that situation. There's a lot of stuff that I could talk about in there. Everything you mentioned is true. Pierre was definitely trying to be a bit more a bit more what's the word I'm looking for? A bit more calculated and a bit more focused on being softer and, like you said, human as well. Jagmeet Singh was trying to be desperate. That's exactly what most of the pundits would say, and that's what I would think too, from what I've seen and what I've read. He seemed like he was desperate for votes. He was desperate to create the relevancy that NDP are important people enough in the debates and in the government, or at least the opposition anyway, right? Carney was pretty states-like and statesman-like in the debates for sure. And Pierre definitely tried to be a lot more on his best behavior, even though, you could tell he definitely was being the attack dog as he normally would be, right? But at the same time, Singh definitely interrupted a lot. He definitely took a lot of time to interrupt, and he wasn't afraid to interrupt. And a lot of the pundits would say, like, that is what happened. And I totally agree with them too as well, because NDP are struggling right now. They need that vote. They need some people to support them. And even Jagmeet Singh's seat, we know, and a lot of people have talked about it, is he's a top out, and he's worried, right? And so he's worried right now. So he's worried for that opportunity. And of course, that's important for him to get that.
Seat, do you know? I assume it's an orange-red race right now.
Correct.
Writing,
correct. But they say even the Conservatives could take those seats as well, depending on what they are. So it's not surprising. Like, I'm really not surprised by that, because like right now, Pierre is trying to be the prime minister, right? And he's trying to pivot, but at the same time, he's not doing a great job with that.
Well, and I guess the question is it too late? Because, and we'll show it. I did pull, everybody knows by now, I am not a Pierre Poilievre fan, but I tried really, really hard to make sure I was pulling his good moments, because I think people deserve to see those, especially if they didn't watch the debate. The question is, though, as we'll see, like, is it enough, and will people believe him? Because Pierre's facing a problem of 20 years of history, 20 years of being an attack dog. He's been an attack dog the whole time Trudeau was leader. And frankly, he was an attack dog until like 2 weeks ago. So does one debate where he's trying to connect with people and showing that he can do it, will that convince people that he will do it? Because I think that we can from the debate and the clips that I'll show you, particularly one from his closing statement, he can do it. But the question is, do people believe that he will do it if they elect him as their prime minister? Or does he get a majority government and then pivot right back? And if they do believe him, is it early enough in the campaign to stick with Canadians? Because remember, like, first off, early voting, and we'll talk about this later, is like record numbers right now. It's Easter weekend. That Thursday, the French debate ran on Wednesday. It had good numbers, and CBC did do like an English translation, but I know, like, out of everyone I know, I think I'm the only one that watched the French English translation debate. And then Thursday was frankly the start of Easter. Wednesday was still kind of a gong show because there was that Habs game. So I know there was a commentator on Power and Politics that flat up said, like, if it wasn't my job to have watched the French debate, I wouldn't have watched the French debate at all. I would have been getting ready and hanging out with friends for the Habs game. So how many Canadians are actually going to see that?
Yeah,
I don't know.
and you bring up a good point there. I don't think many Canadians who don't understand French would watch that debate, to be honest with you. Why would you? Like, is it necessary? Like, and most of the time, the people who watch the French debate, like they said, are the people who are really involved in politics, prepping for it, or really wanting to know what they're talking about. But unless you live in Quebec and understand French, why would you watch it, right? It's not important enough.
Yeah, and even though, sorry, I'll send it right back to you in a minute, but even though they have an English translation, like, it really is more of like a Quebec sovereignty type debate. Like, a lot of the questions are focused on, like, what do these things mean for Quebec?
Exactly, and I don't think it's that important to watch. And most of the time, what they talk in French is geared towards people in Quebec and those areas. So it's not that important to watch. But you talk about whether Pierre is about, whether it's enough time for him to pivot. I don't know. It's people. 2 million people voted on Friday, so
Yeah.
like a lot of
And
people
more
voted,
over the weekend, it sounds.
and more over the weekend, exactly. And so right now, is it enough time? Probably not. Right? If I'm honest, but at the same time, are the people who are voting Conservative, Liberal, or NDP supporters? That would be the question to ask, right? And I think that's important to know. But who knows at this point? You wouldn't really know who's voting for who because these are secret ballots anyway. But at the same time, is it enough time? Probably not, for sure, because if 2 million people voted, and we've talked about voting early as well, is it going to really change your votes? And you already said where kind of you stand, and I think people can already sense where I stand as well.
Well, and that's sort of the thing, right? A lot of polling is currently showing that people have figured it out. Like, they basically know where they are. We'll talk about it later. It looks like Quebec and BC are a little bit unsure, but I'm not even sure. And we'll get into this more later. I think it's more going to come down to the ridings themselves. So, for example, Singh's riding, where it looks like it's a race between the Liberals and the NDP. Well, if that vote splits, what happens when a Liberal and NDP vote splits? The Conservatives come up the middle and take the riding. So I'm actually very interested to see what happens in Singh's riding, because I don't think historically any riding that has the leader of the NDP is not going to be happy with a Conservative MP. Like, it's just not happening, right? But because of that vote split, it has allowed in the past the Conservatives to come up the middle. And we've talked before about how Stephen Harper and Jack Layton basically used this to their advantages to put Layton in the official opposition, and Harper came up the middle in a lot of those close ridings to pass a Conservative majority. Like, that is how Conservatives get majority in Canadian elections. Right now, Poilievre is polling right at the numbers that Conservatives need to usually get a majority government in Canada. But because of the bottoming out of the NDP, it's a problem for them.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point there, and that's definitely a big problem. Yeah, and it's always been a big problem, because that's where you start to. That's why the Conservatives merged into one party so they wouldn't split the votes, right? And so like that's a problem that the NDP and Liberals particularly have to really focus on, because if you start splitting this vote and not voting strategically, as some people have said on various outlets, media outlets in the country, they're voting strategically because they want the Liberals to win. But at the same time, if they're not voting for the Liberals, they're voting for the NDP. That's just splitting the vote to the left. And that's not good for anyone if they want a majority government for the Liberals.
And interestingly enough, we kind of talked about this a little bit. It wasn't in the notes, but since you bring it up, thinking about this, the Green Party tried to do this election, and it actually got them booted out of the leadership debate because they had said, so there's three, I'll remind people, there's three qualifications for being in a leadership debate. You have to reach two. The first one is having at least one MP holding a seat. The second is 4% support across Canada. And the third is MPs running, not MPs, what are they called? Candidates running in at least 90% of ridings. So the Greens on March 28 qualified under endorsing 90% of the candidates and having one seat in Parliament. The Bloc gets to do it because they obviously have one seat and they have 4% of support in Canada because Quebec's so big. However, strategically, the Greens decided we're not going to run candidates in any ridings where we could potentially cause Poilievre to win. This resulted in the LDC saying, oh, well, you don't have enough candidates now. And then the morning of the debate, they kicked him out, which causes problems because the Greens have always kind of had a big voice. And there is a debate, which we won't get into, but there is a debate amongst analysts about whether or not Greens should even be in the leadership debate. But let's put that aside for now. All of the leaders have been prepping for weeks for this thing with the understanding that there would be 5 people. Not that I think we should all feel bad for these candidates because they will adapt, but like that was one of the things, right? It was literally changed the morning of. They changed how that would look. Later, we'll talk about another debacle that changed the debate. But that's a problem.
Yeah, it definitely is a problem, Nicole. And it's one of those situations that, it's the morning of is something that it's not good.
Ridiculous time to do that.
It's a bad time. If you let them know a few days ago or maybe the night of, I can understand those things, right? And like you said, in case people aren't aware, LDC is Leaders Debate Commission, I believe.
Yes, it's leaders.
So, because just in case people don't know what that stands for, they thought maybe something else. But it's definitely a mess, right? And I know there was huge uproar about this is terrible, this is not good, it's about democracy and stuff like that. And my take on it, it's just bad, right? It just doesn't look good. They fit most of the requirements except for that last requirement of, I think it's 90% or whatever, the ridings. They don't want to, and I get why they wouldn't, but at the same time, they have 2 seats, I believe, in Parliament now, and they represent a certain percentage of the vote. Yes, they don't represent a huge percentage. Yeah, they don't have the 90%, but you let them know pretty much the morning of the debate, which is absolutely terrible. And we know how stressful those debates are. You know how much prep goes into those debates. So it just doesn't look good for democracy. I can understand you let them know maybe a few days before. It seems like it was even made decision. It was a decision made a few earlier, right? So at least they can give them some time to notice about it. So there's lots of other problems that happen, but that's not good for democracy anyway.
Yeah. Well, and do you know the story of how that even broke? Yeah. So for our listeners, we're not even sure that they would have announced it as soon as they did. But basically, Chantal, and I'm gonna mess up her last name. I think it's Chantal Hebert. Thank you. I was trying to figure out the French pronunciation. She got a tip off the night before, and that they were gonna do this. And so I was watching Good Talk on Friday, and she said she actually went down to Radio Canada where they were like holding it all and looked in the window to see how many podiums they had.
Mhm.
And then she ran her story. And so
Yeah,
then they
she
had to
broke it.
and then they had to come out and say, and in her story, she basically said like, oh, what did one of the podiums have to get rebuilt? Or are you actually going to kick out the Greens? Obviously, it was pretty obvious at that point that like,
Yeah, she
they were
broke the
kicking
story.
out
I
the
remember
Greens.
watching, I don't think it was Good Talk per se. I think it was actually at issue panel that night.
Yeah, she did. That's where she broke it to begin with, but she told the story of like her going down there and stuff on Good Talk on Friday when they were discussing it, and she was like quite proud of herself, and it was
Yeah, I think,
really
and then I
funny.
think she should be. She broke the story, right? And she did a good job with that, like I said. And
She
she's
always
offers
does
a real,
such a good job.
and she always does. Like she's a very strong Quebec voice in her area, right? So
She's also hilarious.
yeah, she reminds you of a family friend. Let me tell you that much.
She's
I
so
always,
funny.
every time I look at her, I think of my family friend. I don't know whether good or bad. She has the same mannerisms too.
Oh, that's hilarious. Okay, let's move on to housing. Let's talk about housing first. It was quite interesting. I'm going to share my screen again. Sharing the screen is so much harder for some reason. Okay, there we go. Debate highlight. Oh no,
You lost the clip.
I did.
Oh no.
Oh my god, that didn't help. Okay, I found it. I think it's because of it's fine.
Our goal is to double the pace of housing construction. We'll lower your bills, build homes you can actually afford.
Il faudra parler des entreprises du Québec, des travailleurs du Québec, des aînés du Québec.
A big, powerful bring it home tax cut on work, investment, energy, and home building.
Just saying, you wanted it.
Yes, returning to the topic of housing. Now, it's very important. Obviously, we need to build homes that people can afford. Mr. Poilievre had the opportunity to show us what he could do. He was the Minister of Housing under Stephen Harper. And during that time, guess how many homes he built? He built 6 homes during that entire time. This is not something you can trust to build homes. He built
200,000.
6 homes.
200,000.
And this has been confirmed again and again. He built
200,000.
6 homes. That's it. Now, the problem, though, with Mr. Carney is while he's laid out a plan, the problem is that when he was the chair of Brookfield Investments, this is a company that made a strategic decision to buy up affordable homes in cities like Toronto, where people were paying a decent rent. And they purposely bought those homes, kicked out the tenants, and jacked up the rents. That is not someone you can trust, sadly, to deal with the housing crisis when Mr. Carney, you profited off of it.
We're going to get responses here. Mr. Poilievre first, Mr. Carney second.
First of all, Mr. Singh,
gonna hold this up to remind you.
the Toronto
6 right here.
Star, the Toronto Star debunked your
No,
falsehoods
it was
on
6
that.
homes,
And I
that's the
appreciate
facts.
neither Liberals or NDP are very good with math, but in that
You're
year, the
clearly-
year I
you
was
can
the
count up to
minister, if I
6, which
could,
is great.
the year
Let's
I
Mr.
was,
Singh, let's let him answer.
in the year I
It's not
was,
high enough, though.
the year I was minister, we had 200,000 homes built, and guess what the average price of a home was at the time? $450,000.
And guess what happened
And
at the end of the Conservative reign?
one bedrooms
It
rented
doubled.
out for $900, and that since that time, housing costs have actually doubled under the Liberals.
They doubled
And
under Conservatives too.
now we have Mr. Carney making tens of billions of dollars of spending promises that
They
will
doubled under
ultimately
you as well.
continue to build bureaucracy. We don't need more bureaucracy in that for years, Mr. Carney. What we need is to build homes in communities.
Certainly
And
don't
that
need
means
conservatives.
axing taxes on home building and getting the government out of the way so that builders can actually build.
I think,
Mr.
Mr.
Carney,
Can I pick
you
up-
are on housing. We need
Can
a
I-
change, and you, sir, are not a change.
Mark Carney.
I'm going to pick up on, I thought that answer was quite revealing. The first thing is that it's an attitude towards housing that absolutely ignores affordable housing, deeply affordable housing, issues with vulnerable people, ignores the rental market, ignores all other aspects of it. So the 6 are the relevant. Mr. Singh is absolutely right. The 6 are the relevant.
200,000.
The 200,000 are a different part of the housing market. There are many Canadians. There are many Canadians at different income levels. The second thing it reveals is a misunderstanding or well, a misunderstanding, I'll be polite, of how the government's balance sheet can catalyze enormous private investment. And that is what we need to do to solve the housing crisis. It happens to be what we need to do as a whole to address the economic crisis that's been forced on us by President Trump.
Mr. Blanchet?
Yeah. You have spoken much more than I have, so I won't ask a question. I will make a statement instead. I'm not saying no. I'm not saying that you cannot do what you pretend that you are able to do. We just have no proof so far. I'm saying quite clearly that you cannot be entitled to do it alone. You cannot be entitled to hold all the power in your two hands. You cannot go out there and fix things for Canada and Quebec without being seriously checked by serious people. You cannot go out there and speak for Quebec without Quebec having its own strong voice to protect itself and to promote its different economy. So if you want to collaborate, let's say right now that whatever happens, even if minority government happens, you will be a partner with the different Quebec economy and identity, which you have been not interested in for the economic part and not respectful for the identity.
Let me get Mr. Singh in at this point. Can you tell us what's the first thing you would do to make life more affordable for Canadians?
Okay, I'll let you start it off.
Yeah, there's lots to unpack in that situation. First of all, I have to give props to, Steve Payton, the moderator?
He's
he
great.
is just great. I've always been a big fan of his anyway, and he's one of the guys I like to watch, like just for a very unique perspective on things. And he's a really good moderator for this debate, and I've heard that resoundingly across the board. In terms of the affordable housing side of it, and in terms of the numbers being thrown out and whatever, we know these are all lie of numbers, and these numbers don't even make sense.
And let me, sorry, I know I said I'd let you go, but if we want to talk about the numbers, I'm just going to quickly tell our listeners the numbers.
Okay.
So the 6 homes that Singh was referring to were nonprofit units that the Conservatives built in 2015. But that doesn't include the partner builds, which are also technically affordable homes, but not nonprofit. And those partner builds were 4,254. So in total, they built 4,260 affordable homes, which is a far cry from either the 6 or the 200,000. Mm-hmm. Continue.
Yeah, to be honest with you, the numbers are just all over the place, and I'm sure other pundits and other people involved in politics are just cringing at all the numbers that have been thrown out. And I can tell you, honestly, hearing all of this stuff, you just don't know what to believe anymore. And you're hearing 6, and you're hearing this 2,000 pay, and you're hearing this 45 stuff. Like, it's like, what is to believe anymore? Like, they're not.
So that's why it's so important to like dig down. Mm-hmm. And there are several news organizations that actually did this for us. And so they went and actually found the numbers. Mm-hmm. And these are the numbers that under Canada's definition count as affordable homes.
And that's good.
They still did build the other like 190,000 or whatever. Mm-hmm. But those were like through developers, and they were all for profit.
And that makes sense.
And that's what Carney was talking about, how like they're all different numbers, right?
Yeah. And when Poilievre brings up the situation, about, the fact that, he worked for Brookfield and that he bought up these houses and made money on them, and it's a private company. I get that. Like, I come from a business point of view. I get that. That's business 101, is to make money. Like, yes, I get that. And, and so when people say, why is business buying up these houses and wanting to make money? I get that. Like, I totally understand that. I am a business graduate, and I am a business professional myself. At the same time, that's a bit sad, because if we're struggling with affordability right now, and houses especially, companies need to be doing a bit more than making money, right? But they're not in the business to make money, unfortunately, right? So I get that. In terms of like affordable houses, like these numbers don't tell the complete story. And I think it's important for our listeners to know, and even anyone who's involved in politics or even not involved in politics, to understand you need to dig deeper than what's being presented on a TV screen at a debate.
Yeah.
And you need to see beyond, because like I said, if you hear a sound clip of someone saying, I'm buying all these things to build houses and they're not affordable houses, I get that, right? You have to earn money to make anything out of it. But at the same time, you have to look beyond than just that sound clip, because people would say like Carney's just earning money. Yes, he is a businessman. He's the chairman of Brookfield. Of course, he's in the business to make money. He's trying to save his company, right?
And Poilievre also was involved with Brookfield at one point too.
I think most of the MPs were, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think that's being told across the board. And I think people have to realize it's not just Carney, it's not just Poilievre, it's other people as well.
If you've noticed, Poilievre hasn't really hammered in on Carney being a part of Brookfield, and that's because he knows the minute he says that, there's going to be some CBC story talking about what his involvement was.
Yeah, and
he's been really quiet about that.
And I think people need to realize that, like, all of these politicians in that way, like I said, not to say one is better than the other, but they're all involved in these situations. So you have to look beyond, and you have to figure out who is the best candidate that supports what you believe in. Yes, they should be fighting for us and fighting for the people who are less fortunate, for sure. That's their job. But also you have to realize, if you were on the other side of that, you'd be doing exactly the same thing, right?
Well, but see, here's the thing that really bugs me. And, I see it all the time on Facebook. I see it more on the right than the left, but it does happen on the left. And the thing is I'll see, so for example, there's this one lady who's a friend of my mother-in-law, and she posts basically every anti-Poilievre thing ever on Facebook. And every single time I look at it, I'm like, I haven't seen her in a while, so she might have blocked me. And every single thing, I have to go in and be like, this is incorrect. This is incorrect. This is incorrect. Here's the actual thing. Here are the links that shows this has been debunked. Here are the things that we can worry about Poilievre on. And it's doubly frustrating to me, because there are so many things that you can be critical of Poilievre. You don't need to make shit up. And that's what frustrated me with Singh, because he kept saying 6 homes.
Mm-hmm.
It's not true. And I will link all of the research for today's episode in the description box below. Sometimes I forget. So if anybody notices, let me know, but I've already done the YouTube description. It's all there. But back to Singh, if he had said you built 4,200 homes, that still sounds like shit. That's not a lot of homes. He didn't have to say 6. Mm-hmm. And Poilievre would be saying his 200,000, and Singh's going to look like the winner there by being factual, mm-hmm. instead of trying to get it as low as he possibly can and saying 6 homes. And it's not like he could have even gotten away with it by saying you built 6 not-for-profit homes. Mm-hmm. I get where he was trying to go with that. You built 6 not-for-profit homes, and technically the partner builds weren't not-for-profit, but they were more like a rent-controlled project, which is still affordable housing, right? Mm-hmm. And so it was really frustrating for me in that moment to see that happen.
Yeah, and
it just pissed me off.
Nicole, and you bring up a good point there, and honestly, I get pissed off too, because we actually have time to dive in the numbers, and someone like you are really interested in politics yourself. A lot of people don't even have time to do that. So they're going to look at the 6 houses and say, oh, you didn't build these houses. Yes, 4,200 homes is not a lot either, but at the same time, he could have said that, right, for example, and still been on one side and on the winning side potentially of that. But, that's the tough part about politics. I feel like that they don't really tell you the real stuff. And there's all of these things that are lies, but also fabricated and exaggerated. And, as you can probably see, I'm more debating the merits of what's going on rather than the housing. And I think people need to realize that I'm a business person, right? Myself, I get that. I get you need to earn money off these houses. I get that. But at the same time, I think the practical application is they need to be honest and tell the truth and tell the numbers. Yes, it's not what the 200,000 homes that were supposed to be built, but it's not 6 houses, right? So I think people need to understand the numbers don't always tell the story, and people need to understand that just because someone says 6, you need to look deeper and figure out whether it's 42.
Yeah, and I think it's more that like the numbers tell the story, but you need the right numbers. I'm also a stats person.
Yes.
And so like looking at this and breaking it down, when you look at 6, 4,200, 200,000, those all tell a story. It's not great for Poilievre.
It doesn't look good.
It doesn't look good, but that tells a story. Not 6 homes, 200,000. It's also confusing for people. And then people just get pissed off and they turn off these debates. And then a lot of the time they'll just revert back to like, who do I vote for? Who's my MP? And you get incumbency.
Yeah,
stuff.
and
you see that a lot
problem
in Alberta.
And that's another problem. And people get complacent. And I can understand why a lot of my friends feel like politicians are not telling the truth and not being honest. And also they don't really care anymore. Like I have friends who think, I don't even know anymore what to do, right? And I feel like that people like that lady you mentioned online shouldn't be making stuff up either, right? That doesn't help the narrative, and it really kind of turns people off and says that politicians are all liars and politicians are all not there for them. Like I get that, and yet at the same time, politics is so important in everyday life, and like hearing these, and it's just sad to see them, and they're not telling the real story, and the ideas are the same and tired ideas as before, right? And so that's the problem they're having right now. And I know we probably should be debating more of the houses being built and the affordable housing rather than the actual what these things mean. But I feel like that this is just as important right now.
Yeah, for sure. So let's just have a really quick, I'm going to share my screen again. And I'm going to play a quick housing clip from Pierre Poilievre. And then I'm going to show the Liberals' housing plan, and we can have just like a really quick conversation about that. Mic again.
Will be, again, to axe the sales tax on new homes, incentivize municipalities to speed up permits, free up land, and cut development costs, train up 350,000 young people who can be in the trades to build those homes and sell off the land that is going to be needed in order to build homes. That is a real plan for you to own a home and afford your life for a change.
Mr.
Okay. So for those wondering, the reason why I wanted to play the Poilievre clip was because the Conservatives still haven't released their platform. However, this weekend, the Liberals did. So in contrast, the Liberals, and nothing here has really changed from what Mark Carney has been saying. So they want to build more houses, which is similar to the Conservatives. They have said that they want to provide $10 billion in low-cost financing and capital for home builders so that they can do specifically affordable homes. $25 billion in financing to innovate home builders in Canada, including those using Canadian technologies and resources like timber and softwood lumber. This is because Carney's logic is, since we're not going to be selling this stuff to the US, we can utilize it here at home. Cutting red tape. This is really interesting because as you can see, it actually says cutting red tape. That is a conservative talking point. I just want to like point that out because I just think it's super interesting. And as I've stated in the past, like we really are picking between a progressive conservative and a traditional conservative. So anyway, Mark Carney wants to cut the red tape, cutting municipal development charges in half, which are charges that there's like federal government stuff mixed in there. He wants to reintroduce a tax incentive. Now, this is the one from the 70s. And this is specifically for rental housing, which is interesting because you and I talked last week about how nobody has really said anything about the rental market. And this tax incentive, which would be a credit to homeowners who are renting out housing units. So that's quite interesting. Oh, and then he wants to work with provinces on reducing zoning restrictions. And he's also keeping the first-time home buyers, cutting the GST. So that's kind of their two plans. Thoughts? I'll let you go first because I always talk a lot, I feel like.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Fair enough. No, Nick, you're fine. It's just, yeah, that's totally true.
No comment there. I'll leave the experts to decide whether Nick talks a lot. I'm not here to debate whether you talk a lot, but anyway, back on topic. Yeah, it's nice to see both the NDP and Liberals release their platforms and their policy ideas and stuff like that. The Conservatives are still yet to present those policy ideas and those platforms, which is another problem. In terms of the stuff, there's some stuff that actually look eerily similar to what a Conservative government would do, and it seems like they're taking policy ideas and platform ideas from each other and stealing them and, I guess, repurposing them into their own party platforms. Like you said, it looks like a progressive Conservative government and a Conservative government that they're proposing against. Like we mentioned before in lots of other episodes, that Mark Carney is a red Tory, as it appears to be. And so I'm not surprised by a lot of those things, but at the same time, you see the deficits they're running. They're running some huge deficits. They're spending big chunks of money, both the NDP and Liberals. It'd be interesting to see what the Conservatives do and how they tend to rein in spending, because, you know, they always seem to say cut, 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 which is what their mentality is, right? So it'd be interesting to see how they approach that. And like I said, there's lots of good stuff in there. Like, there's lots of things that could help, for sure, different people. But at the same time, you know, it doesn't give the detail that a lot of people want. These are good, fluffy points, right? At the same time, a lot of them, right? Yes, there's some
and just the
details.
logistics of how that stuff's going to work, right?
Exactly.
Like, if we look at Pierre Poilievre, he wants to sell off 15% of federal buildings to turn into affordable housing, but he doesn't say like what that looks like. Are there going to be any constraints on the developers you're selling this for, selling this property to make affordable housing? Or are we going to end up where, like, in a situation where the government didn't actually think about this and just trusted business to do their trickle down crap? And so they sell off these 15% of buildings without a stipulation in the contract saying you need to do X, Y, Z. And then the developers develop it and then still charge an astronomical amount of rent, right? Like, there's so many problems.
Yeah,
And it
that's
would
the
be nice
problem.
to
You know,
see
like, the
some
Conservatives tend to
plan.
do that. That's the thing. The Conservatives always plan to have business try and solve the problem, which
Yeah.
we know doesn't always work, unfortunately. We know what businesses would do if they're given the option. They'll make money, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And, you know, I know people are saddened to hear that, but that's the reality of business 101. That's what you learn in business school. And I'm sure other business people who are involved in business know that. Like, if you don't make money, then why are you in business? I know a few people have mentioned to me when they run their own business, they always said to me, we're not a charity.
Yeah.
We're here to make money. And so
Yeah.
to have businesses decide doesn't always work. Do
No,
some businesses care?
There needs to be something in the contracts.
Does some businesses care and some owners care? Yeah, some do. Like, and there's lots of them, as you know, across the world and of course in Canada. But
they're the exception. They're not the rule.
Exactly. And that's what people have to realize, that if business are allowed to do that, they're not going to do it unless they get punished, or unless they get hold, or unless it's in their contract. They're not going to.
Yeah.
They're not going to do anything.
They follow the rules. It's kind of like looking at Mark Carney, for example. People are still going after him about his assets because, you know, he's a billionaire. And his response keeps being, I followed the rules and I did it earlier. And that's kind of the only thing you're getting out of him. And that is like a total throwback to him as a businessman. He's like, I followed the rules to the T. That's what I'm going to do. kindly fuck off. Like that is,
And
is what
honestly,
he's
if we
done.
were if we were in those situations, would we be doing exactly the same thing? You tell me.
Probably.
So like you cannot
Keep your
say
nose
he's
out of my finances.
yeah, and I'm sure everyone would be doing the same thing, right? So
Yeah.
if you were earning lots of money like Mark Carney and you were the chair of the Brookfield company, would you not want your company to earn money?
Yeah, exactly.
You wouldn't be
He
in
had
a
a
job.
job to do.
Yeah.
He was hired because he's good at that.
Yeah, and he's
I guess,
smart.
like, okay, and I guess this is the other side. If he was like, and we see this with we already know the answer because of how Poilievre is attacking him on his Bank of Governors stuff.
Mhm.
If he was the chair of Brookfield and did a shit job, Poilievre would be like, you did a shit job and they didn't make any money. Like, there's no winning there.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And I think people don't have to not forget those things because that's so important. And people forget that, right? And I know people are saddened by the fact business want to earn money, but that's just 101 business, like I said. And so people have to realize that Mark Carney and business would do what they need to do, and any business would do what they need to do, right? But you can't have let business decide because sometimes they'll actually not do it at all if you're not giving rules and regulations to do. But yes, don't give all the regulation, don't give all of the rules. But if you are struggling and in trouble, why wouldn't you want to have business support you or even people support you? You tell me, right?
Yeah. All right. Well, any last minute bottom lines for you for housing?
No, just read past what's being said on TV and heard, right? And read beyond the numbers. That's for sure.
Yeah, read. Well, or find the right numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Like, don't
Do
trust the
research.
numbers
Do
they're
research.
giving. Yeah, research it, guys. There's lots there. Okay, we're gonna move on to public safety in the charter. Originally, I wasn't going to include this because we talked quite a bit about it last week.
Mhm.
However, Mark Carney said something that I really wanted to drive home to our listeners because we said it last week, and I thought it was so telling to have a politician also say this. And there's two clips that I'll play. But before I play them, I just want to say you're going to hear a lot about Bill C-75, which was enacted by the Canadian Parliament in June 2019. And basically what it was a comprehensive bill to modernize the criminal justice system. So like it wanted to reduce court delays, enhance fairness within the system, bail reform. What else was in there? Sorry, I took notes because I wanted to really make sure so in the bail reform, they wanted to streamline the bail process. This is really important to understand because Poilievre really goes after Carney on this, but it also emphasized the presumption of release over basically being in prison forever, right? And so basically they said like the courts need to really justify why they're keeping somebody in prison, which is like not a Poilievre thing, right? So he went after that quite a bit. They reclassified over 100 different offenses from an indictable offense to a hybrid offense, which was basically done to alleviate the burden on superior courts and expedite proceedings. Jury selection was changed in the sense that it allowed lawyers to dismiss potential jurors without providing reasons. They also overhauled intimate partner violence. The legislation introduced stricter measures for cases involving intimate partner violence, including considering prior convictions during sentencing. Interestingly enough, Poilievre doesn't bring this up because he's been using intimate partner violence in his own campaign. And what he's campaigning on has already been done in this bill, as a side note. The Youth Criminal Justice Act also had amendments, which Poilievre also doesn't talk about because he is also kind of running on that. But what it did was it removed the court's ability to lift publication bans for youth that are convicted of violent crimes. So the only way currently now where a youth who's committed a violent crime will have their name published. Well, actually, there's two instances. Will have their name published is if A, they are moved to adult court, which you can do. You can charge youth as an adult, or which we've seen happen in past cases, like the 12-year-old girl that killed her parents in, is it Lethbridge or Red Deer? It's quite an old case now. Anyway, she killed her parents with her boyfriend. Do you remember that? It was
I do, but I don't remember where it was.
yeah, I can't remember if it was Lethbridge or Red Deer. It was one of the two places. Anyway, the US actually published her name. So everybody knew her name, and she ended up having to change her name. So those are kind of like the only two ways names are going to get published. So I just wanted to say that because it comes up a lot. So I want people to understand what they're talking about. So let's watch these two clips on public safety.
Public safety and security.
Fight crime, to protect Canadians, and to build communities that are safe, secure, and strong.
Keep crime, drugs, stolen cars, and other illegal substances out of our country.
We're going to invest in our borders, and that means hiring more border officers.
Resources are in short supply, not enough staff. This is not the nice way to treat people who come to our border.
Dovetails on the last answer you gave, which is you have pledged to be the first prime minister in this country to use the Notwithstanding Clause, setting aside charter rights of, as you call them, multiple murderers. Why do you think that's necessary?
To be clear, I want to uphold the charter rights of Canadians under Section 7 to life, liberty, and security of the person. Right now, that right is violated by multiple murderers who are given discounts. The case in question was a gentleman who went into a mosque and shot dead 6 innocent worshipers. He got, according to this ruling, only one 25-year sentence, meaning he can be out in his 50s. He only serves 4 years for every murder that he carried out. That is outrageous. And I will use the constitutional powers that are created for this purpose to ensure that mass murderers stay in maximum security penitentiary for life. They will only come out in a box. We will also pass tough new laws that prevent repeat offenders from getting out. If you commit 3 offenses under the 3 strikes law I propose, you will not be allowed out of jail until you prove that you are drug-free, that you are behaved perfectly, and that you've learned an employable skill, and you've served a 10-year sentence. We cannot allow liberal crime and chaos to go on terrorizing our communities. What we need is a real plan for change so that we can bring back the safety and the security that Canadians used to take for granted.
Let me get Mr. Carney to respond to that. Do you think that's an appropriate use of the Notwithstanding Clause of the Charter?
I think that the one of the core responsibilities of the federal government, Prime Minister, is to defend the fundamental rights and liberties of Canadians. And those fundamental rights and liberties of Canadians are outlined in our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is 43 years old literally today. I think it's a very dangerous slope to override judgments of the Supreme Court of Canada. In fact, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms exists to protect Canadians from people like us on the stage, politicians who may use their power to override fundamental rights. And the issue in using by the federal government, I'll stop here, is not where you start, but where will you stop?
Mr. Poilievre, I should get Mr. Poilievre on that. Is it a slippery slope if you use it in this case?
I must say, I would be quite interested too, because Mr. Carney said that he didn't want us to use the Notwithstanding Clause before adopting a law. And yesterday he said that he felt that it was wrong to use the Notwithstanding Clause after a law is adopted. So if we cannot use it before and we cannot use it after, it means that Mr. Carney believes that we should never use it. But it is very important. And the Ford case made it clear. The Constitution says how it should be used, but never how or what we will do with it, because it's the prerogative of the provinces So do you want the Supreme Court to overrule another judgment of the same Supreme Court because you don't like it? Because that would be being the hell of a politician as you define them.
Well, let me just start by saying,
Okay,
first of all, yeah, thank you. I just started by saying, let's not let Mr. Poilievre get away with making this ludicrous claim that anyone on this stage thinks that violent crime should get a less severe penalty. Obviously, that is not a special position that he's taking. Everyone agrees that horrible crimes should have horrible sentences. Judges are equipped to do that. So don't let Mr. Poilievre's rhetoric confuse people. Obviously, everyone agrees that if someone does something horrible, they should pay a horrible price for it. There should be appropriate sentence that's put in place by a judge. But what I'm concerned about is all of what Mr. Poilievre is talking about is after the fact. Now, there's heinous things that happen, and there needs to be severe penalties put in place. But we also need to keep communities safe. And that's what my focus is. Well, how do we stop crime before it happens? Much of the violent crime that's committed is committed by illegal handguns and firearms that come across the border. Now, Mr. Poilievre has admitted that as well, that it is illegal handguns and illegal weapons that are used in violent crime. So our plan is, let's stop those illegal weapons getting into our country in the first place. And the way we do that is by having stronger border security officers and having more people on the border. Mr. Pierre Poilievre, when he was in power in the Conservatives, they cut the number of border officers.
Okay.
They reduced the number,
Let's get
weakening our borders.
keeping an eye on time
Can't
here.
trust them
Let's
to
get
do
back
these
to
type of
Mr.
things.
Poilievre on the issue of whether in using the notwithstanding clause under these circumstances would be a kind of a slippery slope and encourage politicians to use it more.
No, we will use it to protect the charter rights of law-abiding Canadians. I'm interested in the rights of victims. Mr. Carney seems to be very interested in the rights of criminals. He says that it's dangerous for me to ensure that mass murderers stay behind bars for life. You know what's dangerous? Turning them loose on our streets. I don't think you appreciate, sir, the chaos that is unfolding in communities. In Toronto right now, the police have been forced to tell people to just let the thief steal the car. When they break into the house, just take the keys. Just let them take the keys so that you don't get hurt. People are living in terror in many of our communities precisely because of the catch and release bail law, C-75, which requires judges release the accused at the earliest opportunity under the least onerous conditions. Every single member of your Liberal caucus and your Liberal cabinet voted in favor of this bill, and they're all determined to keep it in place despite constant promises to the contrary. Mr. Carney, Canadians deserve to live in peace and security. That is the right that I'm fighting for a change.
I'm fighting for that as well. And let me be specific about two things that have been raised. The first is with respect to these issues of car theft, home invasion, and I'll use the GTA area where there has been sharp increase. How do you attack that? You attack it several ways. One, you increase the criminal penalties for that happening, particularly if you're part of a gang, particularly if you use a firearm.
And you will do that?
And we're doing so. We've committed to doing so. You put in place a reverse onus in terms of bail so that it has to be proven that there's not a risk, which we've also committed to. And then you go to what Mr. Singh was talking about, which is we have to reinforce our frontiers. That's why we're committing to an extra 1,000 Canada Border Service agents, an extra 1,000 RCMPs. That's why, as part of the broader fentanyl initiative, where we've added to the RCMP there, we've added drones, we're adding helicopters, we're adding surveillance, and we're going to the other end of the chain with respect to car theft, which is tightening security at the ports. This is what we need. In order to get results, you need to focus at both ends of the chains of the federal.
Jagmeet Singh.
Thank you very much. I want to talk about one of the issues that has come up is the idea of the public safety concerns around the overdose crisis and how this is devastating our communities. We're seeing so many lives being lost. In that, we know that one of the ways to address that is by investing in some of the solutions like mental health services and rehabilitation services. Services keep our communities safe, having access to those good services. Both Mr. Carney and Mr. Poilievre are proposing cutting government spending and cutting those services. That's not going to make our community safer. We need to see better investments in rehabilitation services, more investments in mental health. We need to respond to this serious crisis in our country with care and compassion. I met with Moms Stop the Harm, an organization of moms that have lost their children to this opioid overdose crisis. They've literally had their children have died because of this. And they're saying we need to do everything possible to save lives, to stop this death from happening. And I think we need to listen to those moms. And that's my commitment.
Mr. Blanchet.
Two things as rapidly as possible. First, we believe that we should act on crime gangs and organizations, defining them as we do for terrorist organization. We have to protect our kids from the violence of those gangs, from the drugs being sold by those gangs, from the guns and whatever else being stolen, sale, being by those gangs.
Sold?
And sold. Not sold, being, you purchase a thing and selling, sold by those gangs. And we mostly have to protect our kids from being recruited by those gangs, becoming violent at 13 and 14 and 16 years old, because this is the real fear of parents like I am. This is a very dangerous situation. I want to come back to immigration because we said that we would come back to immigration. Do you remember the Century Initiative, a sad memory? Officially, they said that they had not considered Quebec difference. They had not considered Quebec language. They wanted Canada to be a 100 million people country by the end of the century. Mr. Barton told me himself that he had not even thought about the Quebec difference in that analysis. And one of his closest collaborators is now a close counselor to Mr. Carney, which seems to be part also of that kind of project or ideology. So it is impossible for Canada to have all those people come into Canada. It is impossible for Quebec to receive all those people. And in Quebec, we have the language and values and secularity of the state issue, which is very important. So I say, pause. Let's do things properly. Let's receive migrants in an orderly fashion and successfully as a measure of respect for them also.
Mr. Poilievre, you wanted a word.
I speak to families all the time who are terrified by the scourge of drugs and illegal guns. And we know those guns are not Grandpa Joe's hunting rifle. So when the Liberals try to ban hunting rifles, they're really going after the wrong people. 90% of guns that come in that are used in crime are smuggled illegally over the porous, Liberal-run borders.
The border,
and that's why the police,
it's
not true. And that's why the police actually, if I could, the police actually endorsed me. The police in Barrie, in Peel, in Sault Ste. Marie have all endorsed me because they know that I will go after the gun smugglers and criminals with 2,000 extra frontline border guards that will stop the guns from coming in. But unlike the Liberals and NDP, I will not ban hunting rifles. The Liberals want to protect. I want to protect Canadians from criminals. The Liberals want to protect turkeys from hunters. I think we know which one makes most
Mr. Carney,
sense.
quick intervention, Mr. Carney, then I got a question for each of you before this segment's out.
Okay. We absolutely fully support hunting and rights of hunters and Indigenous Canadians. But I want to raise an issue, which is a serious issue, talking about safety. There are people, we're in Montreal, in Toronto, across this country, who fear going to their synagogue, fear going to their community center, fear taking their children, leaving their children in school. And this has to stop. This is it's totally unacceptable. So what we're proposing is to make it a criminal offense to threaten or to impede anyone from being near or going to their place of worship, their school, their community center. This, it pains me that when we have to do it, because this is not what we should be doing as Canadians, of course, but we will put that in place.
Let me get back.
And this is a fundamental issue with respect
Let me
to any
get 10 seconds from each of you before this segment's out on what you perceive to be the biggest security threat to Canada right now. 10 seconds each. Mr. Poilievre.
The physical security threat to our country is the rampant crime wave that is running out of control. After the last decade, we had a 116% increase in gun crime. We need to lock up the criminals.
I got to hold you to 10 seconds. Mr. Carney?
Well, we're in a security section. I think we didn't have a chance to talk about anything internationally. I think the biggest security threat to Canada is China.
China, you say? Yeah. Mr. Singh.
Biggest security threat, illegal guns and drugs coming across the border, and cuts to services that would make our public safety and security even worse.
Last word to Mr. Blanchet.
The fact that neither Quebec or Canada is able to protect itself and that we are still dependent and entirely dependent on Americans to protect us.
Okay.
Okay. I'll let you start while I fix my mic again.
Yeah, there's a lot to decipher there. You know, it sounds like Pierre Poilievre is dodging a few of the questions.
You think?
And it feels like that he's really trying to instill fear. And at the same time, he's trying to play the statesman. He's trying to play the person who is logical and the others are illogical. And it doesn't seem to be working very well because he's lying, if I'm honestly saying at times. I know Nicole's laughing in the background, which is funny as well. But I think it's true because honestly, we know exactly what the Conservatives would do. We talked about it before. We know what the Conservatives are about. We know how they like to approach these tough on crime things. And we know that they'll take on these opportunities to do it. And unfortunately, this bill, this whole bill thing is just a mess. And I feel like that, it's more focused on the fear. And it sounds like, it's a sign of, that it's a bit of desperation and laziness at the same time. Like it feels like that they really don't care. And I think that Canadians don't know what this bill necessarily is, and they need to focus on it being explained because leaders usually don't explain these bills. And I think the problem with people, they don't dive into this bill and they don't dive into the policy of it. So I think there needs to be a lot more explanation of what's going on and a lot more. And I think it's being thrown around. A lot of these things are being thrown around.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, there's a few things that came up. The most striking is sort of the differences in how to deal with this. So on the one side, we have the tough on crime, which is not, that's normal for the Conservatives. What's abnormal about his approach is the stomping on charter rights. And at one point he said, we want to protect law-abiding Canadians. That's very telling, right? And it's very similar to what Donald Trump was saying in the US. The only difference is that I think when Pierre Poilievre talks about like law-abiding citizens, I think it's different than Donald Trump, right? Like, I don't think that Pierre Poilievre is going to just randomly start rounding up people on the street and like sending them off to El Salvador as well. Like, I don't think that's going to happen. It could, but I don't think that it will. Like, I think when our Conservatives say like tough on crime, like it is when he says violent offenders, that's what he's talking about. But the problem is that in this country, everybody within the borders has those charter rights, whether you're a criminal or not. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, Mr. Poilievre, whether or not you think they should have them. They do have them. And
Yeah.
I think what Mark Carney, the real thing I wanted people to get out of that clip was when Mark Carney was standing on stage and he said that the point of the charter is to protect people from the people on that stage. And that cannot be overstated. And he also said the problem is, where does it stop? It was a little bit annoying about the bloc and how they tried to, because the thing is Quebec really, really likes the Notwithstanding Clause. So I wasn't surprised to see him get his back up about it. But when he was talking about how like you can't use it before, you can't use it after, should we just never use it? Correct. It should not be used. I am very much an advocate of make that go away. It's stupid. The only reason historically the Notwithstanding Clause is in our charter is because the provinces threw a hissy fit about the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and wouldn't sign it unless that was put there. That said, this is one of those like norms things that we see collapsing in the US. The reason the notwithstanding clause is there was for provinces to use it in cases where the federal government overstepped. That makes it slightly more acceptable when provinces do it, although Alberta and Saskatchewan have done some appalling things with it that makes me more on the other side. So it wasn't meant for the federal government to use it. They can, but norms and good faith, when that was introduced in the charter, said this is for the provinces to use when we overstep. And I'll stop right now.
Yeah, and you make a good point with a few things, and I'll hit on a few things. The whole thing about immigration. People need to realize also that Pierre's wife, I believe, is from Venezuela, right? And so can you imagine if he were to deport people like her? Right? It's technically creating a problem for his own family. So
I mean, so is Trump.
Yeah,
Melania's from
that's true. But
where's
you know,
she from? Somewhere Eastern Europe. I mean, they date each other, so maybe it's different.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, right? And so you have to realize, look at Pierre Poilievre's wife. That's always attending events with him anyway. So I think that's a first thing people have to realize too, right? Yes, Trump has a foreign wife, but you know how they are together, right? So it's a little bit different in that situation. And also, like, I agree with you on the thing that freedom and charter rights need to be protected, and there's no debate on that. I think anyone who lives in Canada can agree, right? And even like you said, criminals do have that right, regardless of whether they're criminals and do violent crimes or not. So that's another thing that needs to be also upheld, and that's not going to change. And
I think that it's also important to note there that like the tools already exist, as we talked about last week, in the criminal code to deal with violent offenders.
Exactly.
They get labeled as a dangerous offender.
And people can debate all the merits of whether the sentences are valid and all this thing, but at the same time, like, yeah, it's there.
But it's not even a judge that puts a dangerous offender on. No. A prosecutor can, once a guilty verdict has been rendered, they can petition the judge and say, for example, after Paul Bernardo was found guilty, the prosecutor said, we want a dangerous offender label put on Paul Bernardo. And the judge said, absolutely, yes. Same thing happened with Clifford Olson.
And there's some of the most violent and most crazy, I think it's that very blunt, very lightly saying, people, right? Yeah. Criminals especially, right? So I totally agree. Like, the charter rights should never be trampled on, and they should never be infringed on. Am I surprised that he wouldn't go ahead and do that?
No,
I don't think so. Like, I really don't think so. It sounds like he really is leading towards that, and I think people need to understand that it's something that has to be taken seriously, right? And something that he has been saying. So yes, you may not agree with what the other parties want to do in terms of other policies, but you have to take him at his word. And he's always been that attack dog, and he seems to be that attack dog.
Well, he's just like Trump. He is saying, I will do this. Trump said during his campaign, I will put tariffs on shit. Then he put tariffs on shit, and people were like, what do you mean you're putting tariffs on shit? So like, I kind of feel like, and again, I'm not saying that Poilievre is Trump. I'm saying like Poilievre is telling you, I will do this. Believe him. The other thing I wanted to talk about real quick is this 3 strikes law, because I think people really need to understand how scary a 3 strikes law is. We have over 50 years of research and real-time examples from the US about how 3 strike laws are used. They disproportionately affect minority populations, which should be no surprise. Here, they will disproportionately impact the Indigenous population, no question about it. Now, Pierre Poilievre says that the 3 strikes law will only apply to violent offenders. The same thing was said of offenders in the US. But there is case after case after case of 3-strike laws applying where the last broken law was stealing from a convenience store or something like that, where, and I'm not saying that like we should brush that off because, you know, those are people's livelihoods, but do you go to jail for the rest of your life without the possibility of parole because your third strike was stealing a loaf of bread? Like, and I get it. Like, people are like, oh, well, you broke the law 3 times, but like, this is serious. We're not talking about like a minimum mandatory sentence of like 10 years if you break a third law. We're talking about you're going to prison for the rest of your life.
Yeah, and I think that's another debate that has to be had. And you know, like I remember from my experience working at the Crown Prosecutor's Office, for those who are not aware, I have a bit of their Crown prosecution background where worked on disclosure. And let me tell you, some of the criminal records I've seen are crazy long in nature.
Yeah.
And do I think you should be punished for stealing a loaf of bread? Absolutely. Do I think you deserve like
life in prison?
No, exactly. Do you deserve life in prison? No. But at the same time, again, it depends on situations too. If you're 15 years old and you still have a loaf of bread, do you think you should be thrown in prison for life? Not really. But at the same time, like if you're like maybe let's say 50 and you keep on stealing loaves of bread, there's another problem there, right?
Yeah, but what is the problem? And I think Singh did a really good job of saying, like, you don't need a 3 strikes law. You need community planning, because there is a reason why we can see a revolving door of criminals.
And I think you have to realize that also people, sorry to interrupt,
no, absolutely.
There's a systemic issue of why they keep on stealing this loaf of bread. Yeah, they might, like I can tell you, they might steal a loaf of bread at the beginning, and then they'll steal a piece of an iPhone, for example, or they might end up stealing a car, and then like it keeps on getting bigger. And I think there's a whole systemic problem. You have more, you have more understanding about sociology of crime, but I think there's a systemic problem of why it keeps on going on, and then people might abuse someone. I think there's problems that socially need to be addressed in order to solve these problems. It's not just the crime itself. Crime itself is just the action that occurred.
Yeah.
Well, and I think there's problems that have to be addressed, right, at the bottom.
And I think that when we look at like violent crime and 3 strikes, that's something as say like somebody has a temper and gets into 3 bar fights and assaults someone on 3 separate occasions. Those are violent crimes under the law. And so it's just this really slippery slope. And of like in the US, again, I'm not saying it happens here, but there's been cases where like somebody stole something from a convenience store and they happened to be carrying a knife at the time, which wasn't used during the crime, but was used to demonstrate, okay, this was robbery with a weapon, therefore it qualifies as violent crime and you're in prison now for the rest of your life. So there's a lot of like manipulation of those laws in the US that over the years have been practiced. And I thought that Singh did a very good job of like explaining how we need like community supports and mental health. As a side note, I will say here that I couldn't find this weekend an instance of where Carney was saying that he would cut mental health and addiction services. So if anybody does have a link for that, that's not like, you know, that's credible, pop it in the comments below, because I'd love to read it, but I couldn't find anything. He's been very clear of being sort of that middle ground, and we saw that in the debate, right? Like he was like, yes, we need to change some of these laws. We need to have a reverse onus on bail. But we also need to improve these community aspects so that we're preventing crime to begin with, like more border guards. As an instance, right?
And I totally agree with you. And those things need to be addressed. And like I said, there's a problem systemically at the community level. If people are going to jail and they're falling to crime situations, right? There's a really big problem, and people need to realize that crime, like, I don't say not to say, stealing is good. Like, that's not the point, right? But like, that is a very minor crime, unfortunately, compared to killing someone or murdering someone. Like, I'm not saying it's not a crime, but it is a crime. But
frankly, if somebody's killed somebody 3 times, they're not getting out of jail. They probably wouldn't make it to 3 times. To be
Let's
totally
hope not
honest
anyway.
with
Let's
you.
hope not anyway, right?
There are sentences like that's 20 years. So
Yeah, and so that's the
pretty
thing.
rare.
And people have to realize that, like I said, I saw everything when I was working at that prosecutor's office. And, I saw DUIs, I saw theft, I saw animal abuse, sexual abuse. Like, I saw everything there, right? And some of them were harder to deal with than others. Let me tell you, especially when you have graphic pictures and graphic notes of what happened. And like I said, to be honest with you, those crimes of stealing like $5,000 or less than $5,000, maybe I think it's $500 or whatever it was, seems so minor compared to killing someone.
Well, in Canada, there's theft under 5,000 and theft over 5,000.
Yeah.
So
And, like,
we don't have grand theft auto in Canada. It's if you steal a car worth less than 5,000, you get charged with theft under 5,000. If you steal a BMW, you get charged with theft over 5,000.
Yeah, and like honestly, those crimes seem a lot more minor, especially when I saw people, they said they stole something from the store or whatever, right? A small little thing from the store, and they still get a criminal record for that. I get that, but at the same time, it's sad. It's really sad to see these people, right? And like,
there needs to be an underlining address of those issues, because I guarantee you that every single offender that had a multi-page record, it was more than just like, I want to commit crime.
And yeah, honestly,
There's
like, and
usually
like
underlying circumstances.
and you see these stories that a lot of them had like mental illness, they were raised badly, they had drug addiction, they might have been, abused when they were kids, right? Whatever it might have been, right? And they just feel like this is the way they have to go. And like I said, they're not old. A lot of them are actually in their 20s, maybe even younger, and then they're in their 30s and 40s.
Yeah, where there's still a chance where they could become a productive member of society.
Yeah.
And this is where I'm with Carney, where it's like, yeah, we have to obviously deal with those people, but we also need things in place where like that won't happen. Like, I'd rather not get stabbed by somebody who's like on crack and having a hallucination in the first place. Like, I think I'd rather have them getting some help.
And I honestly, once you fall into the life of crime, you tend to fall into that life of crime. And it's unfortunate because, like you said, the pages and pages were very sad. And like I said, they were small to start out with, and they became bigger problems,
Well,
right?
it's hard to get out of it, right? Like, once you have a criminal record, it's really hard to like get a job at all. So a lot of the time when they get out of prison, they end up falling back into crime, even if they don't want to, because of that. So like, there's a lot of like sociological things that maybe we can dig into in like a themed episode. But for now, I'm going to move on real quick. One last question on this before we move on to the leaders grilling each other. What did you think of the final answer where I thought this was really telling, because they were asked what the biggest security threat to Canada is. Poilievre said rampant crime. Mark Carney said China. And the NDP, Jagmeet Singh, said illegal handguns coming over the border. This is like really telling, like just in terms of what public safety is going to look like, and where, like, clearly Mark Carney, when he hears threat to security, he's thinking like national security, big picture. Poilievre is thinking Canadians don't want crime, so I'm going to say crime, because like that's long been a conservative trope, is just like rhetoric around crime. And then the NDP, I feel like his response was like a response knowing what Poilievre had said to illegal guns coming over the border, to like really drive home that like community needs. And I think that's like very telling in policies that we're going to see.
Yeah, and you make a good point there, and that's the truth. It shows what the priorities for each leader and each party is right now. And there's lots of security that comes with China when you talk about Mark Carney, and you talk about like Beijing and all those places. There's lots of security there for sure, and there's a lot of issues there. And you see Jagmeet Singh focusing on handguns. I don't know how many people bring handguns over the border, right?
It's actually a problem, and it's been going up year over year over year.
It has gone up, but I'm saying like in terms of like global security of China, I think that's an issue too. That's a big issue.
Well, see, but that's the thing, right? This was the public safety section, so I guess it kind of like clearly Mark Carney's thinking big picture. I'm going to talk about national security here.
Yeah.
The other two were more on like point for public safety. So I do want to like, that was the topic. That was the section. So I don't want to say that like neither of them care, because as we'll see, Poilievre does get grilled about his security clearance again, and China comes up again.
You know, I get like, you know, the handgun problem definitely is a problem. Not saying it's not. Like, these are all big problems, right? But
I think the reason why we don't see it as much is because it's mostly a problem in Vancouver and Toronto. Gun violence has gone like skyrocketed. Don't get me wrong, it has skyrocketed in Calgary, but not to the extent that it has in Toronto and Vancouver.
And also, we're not a border place too, and that's the thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I think it doesn't come up in Calgary or in Alberta particularly very much, but at the same time, you know, like it is a problem. It's not saying it's not an issue. It's a big issue for some people for sure. But I'm saying you can see that the others, like these are domestic issues, and the other one is more of a national, international issue, right? That Carney's being focused on, which makes sense. His view is more international and national anyway. Right. And I get that. So you have to figure out which one is more resident towards you. Do you feel like there's a gun problem where you live? If you're in BC, then that's something you might have to focus on. But at the same time, you have to look at the Charter of Rights and Freedom, the Notwithstanding Clause that Pierre is looking at too. But Carney, you have to also look at what his policies, whether you feel like he's the right person for the job. So.
But also, like, and this is the last thing I'll say, I do take an issue with Pierre Poilievre being like rampant crime, like we're not like El Salvador or something.
I don't think we have rampant crime. Do I think it's a problem? There's definitely problems, but do I
like
think
that
it's rampant?
definitely an attempt to fearmonger and be like, you need to elect me so that I can take care of all of the criminals wanting to break into your house to steal your car keys.
Yeah, and I don't like, not to say it doesn't happen. I hope people understand, like, I'm not discounting how important these other issues are.
Well, now they just clone your keys. They actually, the police in Calgary were saying, make sure you leave your keys in the middle of your house, because with the types of key fobs we have now, there's cloners, and they literally will just come outside one of your doors. And it's close enough that they can clone your fob and just like take your car that way. They don't need to invade your house.
Well, criminals would do whatever they need to do. They're getting smarter, as you know, taking SIM cards out of iPhones. And
you know what? Just clone my key fob. I'm fine with it. Don't break in and stab me for my shitty car.
But you know, like we just have to be careful, like, and you have to figure out what issue is most important to you and who will fulfill those areas of concern for you, right?
For sure. Okay, let's move on to the leaders questioning each other. I want to focus here on a couple of things. So the first thing I'm going to play is this clip I labeled as Poilievre being human, because I think it's really important. And it was kind of from this area. And then I'm going to play Poilievre and Mark Carney questioning each other, because I think this is the one part in the debate where Mark Carney completely effed up. And you'll see why in a minute here.
But on the other side, I had a rule that at all my rallies, even when they're really big, I would stand in front of a flag and greet every single person and hear their stories and learn their struggles. And that was always touching to me, that they would put their faith in me or in any of us.
Yeah.
But we've been in such a rush because we have to get off to the next event. So we haven't been able to stop and do that. And I want you to know out there, I haven't forgot about you.
Fred, what do you make of that?
Yeah, what do we make of that? Okay, hang on. I do have another clip. There we go. No, that wasn't it. Videos.
His opportunity to ask the question of whomever he'd like here, and that will be
Mr. Carney. But if I could begin by setting the stage. The choice in this election is, after a lost Liberal decade of rising cost and crime and a falling economy under America's thumb, do we want to elect them to a fourth term? Or do we want to change? Change so that you can afford food and homes. Change so that you can be safe on your street, and change so that your paycheck grows faster than your cost of living. change with a new conservative government, because Mr. Carney has not changed. Mr. Carney, in 2020, it was recorded, you began advising Justin Trudeau. It's still on the Liberal Party website today that you are Justin Trudeau's economic advisor. They might want to update your website on that. On June 3rd of 2021, you said that inflation would be a sign of economic progress. And you advised governments, including Justin Trudeau's, your Liberal government, to print money, which led to the worst inflation crisis in a generation. Now, that means that mothers went to bed with empty fridges and empty bank accounts, worried how they'd feed their kids, that seniors worried they'd be evicted from their homes, that young people believe they'd never be able to own a home in the first place. Now, in retrospect, you look back on the Liberal decisions that you advised Justin Trudeau to take. Will you look at the camera in the eye and apologize to the many people who suffered as a result of the inflationary policies that you advised Justin Trudeau to implement?
You know, I said earlier, but I'm going to say it again. I know you want to be running against Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau isn't here.
Are you denying
I am here.
Economic advisor?
I did not provide any of that advice. I did not provide any of that advice.
On the Liberal Party website. Are you accusing your Liberal Party of lying about your role? Because it says today you can go to the Liberal Party website now, and it says that you are Justin Trudeau's economic advisor.
The way you judge someone, in my view, is how they act, what they do when they have responsibility. Twice I was a central bank governor, and in both cases, if I may, in both cases when I was responsible for inflation, inflation was less than 2%. I'll add that when I was here responsible for the Bank of Canada, inflation was less than 2%. Our dollar was at parity. That is the kind of success that I can deliver for this country coming out of this crisis. And what is at stake here? What is at stake here? What is at stake here?
That gave us the worst inflation that we have had in a generation, because the policies that you implemented and those of the MPs that are still in your ministry,
to the
fellow Canadians,
crisis which
the last 10 years has been about the Liberals. The next 10 years should be about you.
And that's time. Mr. Carney, good news is the next question is yours.
Well, I'm going to ask myself a question. Actually, I'm going to ask a question which has been troubling me. And it's troubling me because, you know, we are in a very dangerous and divided world.
Who is it to?
I'm going to ask a question, Mr. Poilievre. Why not? We're in a dangerous and divided world. We talked earlier about the challenges in the Middle East, the threats from Iran, threats from Russia, Russia's aggression in Ukraine. We have the threats from China, which I raised. We have the United States, which is fundamentally changing its security relationships, its commercial relationships. We have all this. And in the context of that, everyone on the stage, Mr. Blanchet, Mr. Singh, myself, we have our top secret security clearance. We have our top secret security clearance. I got mine within 3 weeks. It wasn't hard, but I felt it was important that I had it so I could be in a position to be informed about that dangerous world and take decisions that. And Mr. Poilievre, it is now 950 days, if my numbers are right, since you've had the opportunity to get your top secret security clearance, and you've refused. Why?
Well, first of all, I have got my security clearance when I was a minister. I got top secret clearance at the time, so there's no problem getting that. But when the government made this recent offer, they said that if I got the secret security clearance briefings, that I would be gagged under the security law, and I could be prosecuted if I spoke freely about matters of foreign interference. Now, given that Canada has experienced Chinese interference by Beijing, the government of China, in 2 consecutive elections, I needed to do my job to speak freely without fear of prosecution. And that was not something I would be allowed to do. Even Thomas Mulcair, the former leader of the NDP, said that when he was the leader of the opposition, he never would have accepted the kind of gag order that your government and Mr. Trudeau's government was attempting to impose on me. And it's good that I'd made that decision, because it has allowed me to speak freely about things like the case where one of your candidates, sir, actually said that he wanted to send a political opponent to China under a bounty threatening his life or imprisonment, and you refused to get rid of him. Now, it might have something to do with the fact that you went to China not long ago to get a $250 million loan for your company. But the reality is you refused to stand up for a Canadian who was being threatened by a foreign government. And I was able to speak freely on that matter because I refused the gag order that the Liberal government attempted to impose on me.
Well, there's a couple of interesting things. I think people at home have seen a robust debate here, and it's been a robust campaign, and it has not stopped Mr. Blanchet or Mr. Singh at times during his campaign by making challenges with respect to these issues. So one can address it. I will observe, as someone with the top secret security clearance, that China is not the only country that is accused of foreign interference. And
gentlemen, that is time
we'll leave
for
it
the
at
segment.
that.
That's our time.
Let's start with Poilievre's question. And before we get into it, I think it's really important to note, and Mark Carney didn't do a good job of, like, I don't know why he didn't push this point home, but yes, Mark Carney was Justin Trudeau's economic advisor, but we don't know what advice Mark Carney gave him and what he chose to do. So we don't know, like, Justin Trudeau could have just ignored everything Mark Carney said, and we wouldn't know that, right?
Mhm.
So I'll let you take it first.
Yeah, and you make a good point there, and and I think people have to understand that first and foremost. And I think people have to understand when you're in those roles of economic advisor, whatever positions they are advising these people, ultimately, depending on the leader, it's up to the leader to decide what they want to take and what they want to accept. So yes, he was close to the prime minister. Yes, he probably had the ear of him, but at the same time, Justin Trudeau was the leader, and at the time, like, if he wanted certain things, he would have done certain things anyway. So I think people have to take a step back and look at the fact that just because you're quote unquote economic advisor doesn't mean you are going to get all your ideas pushed through, and nor would they go through all the time. So that's the first point. The second point is that, I don't think Mark Carney personally did a great job with standing up for himself here. And I think that's kind of, lightly saying it, but I think if I want to say he did a horrible job. He did a horrible job. And I think people need to understand that that doesn't look good on him. It also doesn't look good on his party, and it doesn't look like he's standing up for himself. And that's not a good sign for voters when they're looking at who to vote for. I think also Pierre was being a little bit aggressive, and
his aggressive side came back for sure.
And so that's the problem too, right? And I think the moderator unfortunately didn't step in, and the other parties didn't step in because they're all attacking Carney anyway. So I think I get that, right? And so
we didn't show it, but both Jagmeet Singh and the block guy whose name always escapes me,
Rachette
also asked Carney a question. That's why he was like, I'm going to ask myself a question.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, and I think Mark Carney should have done a better job because, like, he needs to show that he's standing up for himself, number one, but he needs to show the things that Pierre Poilievre is saying is not true, right? And yes, I get people who say, oh, he advised Justin Trudeau. Yes, he advised Justin Trudeau. There's no lying about that. It's on the website, right? But at the same time, it's not always advising the prime minister. That's the problem.
But it's advising, right? Like, he could have given him like completely different advice, and then Justin Trudeau could have been like, you know what, we're gonna do this. And they're very different people. That was actually a terrible, in my opinion, appointment, because they're so different, which we can see in Mark Carney's progressive conservative policies versus Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau was much, much further left than Mark Carney. So it wouldn't surprise me to learn that he didn't take a lot of his advice. What we can do, though, is look at Mark Carney's history. As like, I thought this was the one good point he did make. His history as governors, right, of two major banks during two major crises, and you can make that speak for itself and kind of go from there.
And I think people have to realize that, like, you know, like, even though this wasn't his shining moment per se,
it gets worse.
But at the same time, I think you have to, like you said, take into perspective his leadership and what he's done in the past, right? And like I said, you cannot always think that the Prime Minister will take the advisor's point of view. Like, we know that from conservative governments, let alone liberal governments, let alone any form of governments. They don't always take their advisor's point of view. And so you need to take a step back and not say he is Justin Trudeau, because he's not Justin Trudeau, like you said in other clips. He's actually his own person and he has his own view. And so I think people have to understand that is not, Justin Trudeau is not there anymore. And Justin Trudeau is not advising Mark Carney either. And I don't think Mark Carney would also take Justin Trudeau's views either and advice too all the time. So I think Pierre got too much airtime in that clip, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And he got too much momentum.
So he didn't really let Mark Carney answer, I think, is part of it.
And he was being too aggressive about it. Like, because
they only had so much time, and he was like, let me start with context, and ran out like a whole bunch of the clock, and none of that was context. It was just him pushing stupid campaign slogans. And by the way, if I never have to hear "for a change" again, it'll be way too soon, because I'm sick and tired of that slogan. I thought "axe the tax" was bad. Like, just make your point. Just make your point.
And like, honestly, it was
exhausting.
A bad thing, right? So that's my view, and I'm sure other people share similar, or they may not. But at the same time, look beyond what you see on that screen, right? Look beyond what you see there, and honestly, look and think of it logically, think of it practically, and don't think of it like that. Just because you're an advisor doesn't mean your advice is being taken too, because we know that from every politician or every person who works for their parties or their politicians, they never always take their advice.
Yeah.
And someone like, Stephen Harper didn't really take advice from people, and yet he had advisors. So do you really think Justin Trudeau would take all Mark Carney's advice? Probably not.
And they're both kind of like bloated. They have egos.
Yeah.
Like both of them, right? So yeah, it's
all politicians have egos. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, some of them just hide it better than others.
Yes.
Poilievre. Okay, so let's move on to the massive fuck up that was Mark Carney there. I don't know, maybe I'm alone in this, but what a waste of a question. We have heard this over and over and over again. Given the fact that we just had this China debacle where and people did get mad. So people actually got mad at me for this. I wrote an article a couple weeks ago when this whole thing happened with the conservative candidate who had a bounty on his head from China. And I basically wrote an article saying it's absolute bullshit that Mark Carney stood behind an MP who is saying we should send this Canadian citizen and just give them to China. Like, what the actual fuck? And so to ask about his security clearance, knowing full well, because this has been an ongoing thing in not even in this campaign for over a year, more than that. And we know Poilievre's answer is the Liberals are trying to gag me, blah, blah, blah. I can't have my security clearance. And also I already got my security clearance. And then to have such a fresh moment of this China thing happening, it was basically Mark Carney being like, I'm handing you another win. What was that?
Yeah, it was a bit of a waste. And considering how that previous clip went, and the fact that that he already got kicked in the previous stuff, to bring that up, we know where Pierre Poilievre stands on that security clearance. We don't need to know any more about
Trump. He could have grilled him more on rights. He could have there are just so many things he could have asked. And we'll get to Trump, but really the only section that was they talked about like Trump was tariffs. Like it really didn't dominate. And Mark Carney needed it to dominate. And he tried. There were several different areas where he would try to bring it back to Trump and just nobody was interested. And he could have forced Poilievre to start saying more about Trump in that moment. But instead he chose this weird ass question that we already, it was like he forgot that might be a thing and didn't like plan ahead.
Yeah, and I think the response wasn't the best, if I'm honest with you. And his also his ability to kind of to adapt to that, and that shows kind of maybe the fact he's a new politician, I guess now, and I get that. But at the same time, his people working around him should have better prepared him for the situation, right? And I think the problem we have now with Pierre Poilievre is that he dominated that conversation. Like he was in that conversation the whole time and went on a rant. And Mark Carney just couldn't adapt to that situation, which makes sense based on the fact he's a new politician, but it just didn't help him. It didn't make him look good either. It actually affected him more than here. And to bring up a question about, security, which we know where he stands on it, is just not the right time and right place for that. Like you need to kind of hit back harder. And if I was an advisor, I'd be very disappointed with what he's done in that situation, because he needs to be stronger and forceful on stuff that Pierre is not standing up for, right? Or standing for. So that was a big problem. And I think Mark Carney screwed up in that situation.
100%. Okay, let's move on to tariffs.
Another big issue.
This is going to be a longer one. Which screen is it? This one. And I might cut it off, but we'll see how it goes, because it's important and it's sort of the focus of the whole election campaign, right? So there's 2 clips, and I'll play them back to back.
Canadians know how to weather a storm. Canadians know how to get through a difficult time.
If at the end of the day, we end up with the balance of power, Quebec is safer than it could be in any other scenario.
Now is not a time for weakness. Now is the time to take back control.
Canadians are always ready when someone else drops the gloves.
You will each have a minute to answer, and then we'll go to open debate. And the first question goes to Mr. Carney. Okay, what is the starting point for negotiations, Mr. Carney, with the United States if, as you have stated, our relationship with the U.S. is over as we know it?
Well, first, Steve, may I thank you and also thank fellow leaders for their service to Canada, people at home for taking the time to watch. I just want to underscore the premise to your question, because I think the relationship that we've had with the United States, relationship over the course of almost the last 4 decades, which has been one of steady and increasing integration, has fundamentally changed, because the president is looking to fundamentally restructure the trading system. So the starting point has to be one of strength. It has to show that we have control of our own economic destiny, has to have a clear plan here at home to build this economy, to diversify our trading partners with like-minded countries, and also has to have a position of strength in terms of our reaction to the U.S. unjustified tariffs. And that's why we have put in place counter tariffs that have maximum impact in the United States and minimum impact here at home.
Mr. Poilievre, would you do anything differently?
Well, first of all, thank you, Steve, and thank you to our fellow contestants here today. It's an honor to be here. What would I do different? Well, I'll start by what I would do the same. I think we do need to counter the American tariffs with our own to deter this economic aggression. We must make clear that we will always be sovereign and independent. What would I be doing differently? Well, we need to be in a position of strength. The Liberal government has weakened our economy with anti-energy laws, red tape, and high taxes that have driven $500 billion out of our country into the United States and made us incapable of shipping our resources overseas. That weakness threatens our ability to stand up for ourselves. So what would I do? I would cut taxes red tape, and approve our resource projects so that we can get our goods to market and bring home the jobs, so we stand up to President Trump from a position of strength.
Mr. Singh, you get the next question. Can we trust the United States to work with us on matters such as Arctic sovereignty and defense policy?
I think we've seen, first of all, good evening, everyone, and thank you for tuning in, and thanks for the question, Steve. We've seen what, for a lot of people, feels like a betrayal when we look at the United States. I grew up in a border town, I grew up in Windsor, and we saw how connected we were as a city and as a community. People lived on one side of the border, worked on the other, people traveled back and forth all the time. We're in the automotive capital of Canada, and we knew how important it was to be able to build cars in Canada, but we saw that those cars went back and forth across the border. Seeing what Donald Trump did to attack Canada in this unprovoked way without any justification really felt like a betrayal. And so Canadians now are right to say, well, we don't really trust Donald Trump at this point, and we can't really have a lot of faith in him. So when it comes to our Arctic sovereignty and our security, we need to make decisions that are in our best interest and no longer be so dependent and so reliant on the US. And that's what I would advocate for, making sure we are resilient, independent, and less dependent on the United States.
Mr. Blanchet, for you, what supports would you want to see for industries affected by tariffs, many, of course, of which are in Quebec?
Many of them. First, be all welcome in Quebec and Montreal. You have me because I try not to speak English in Montreal. However, I think we should never underestimate the threat that Mr. Trump poses on Quebec economy and Canada economy and Mexico economy. But we must acknowledge the fact that the economy of Quebec is built differently. The challenges are not the same. The necessity for Quebec to have at least partly its own voice in the negotiation is important. The difference between Quebec and Canada is very important in terms of economy, but also in terms of identity and language and values and who we are and the way we want to handle immigration. So we have the right to be different. And if this difference is being respected by whoever becomes Prime Minister of Canada, we will be reliable partners in order to achieve the best possible negotiation and protect ourselves and our economies as partners.
Merci, Monsieur Blanchet. Okay, we now move into open debate, and I'll start it off, Mr. Carney, with you, and then we go from there. Do you still support dollar-for-dollar tariffs, even if they ultimately threaten Canadian jobs and businesses?
No, and in fact, we've already moved off from dollar-for-dollar tariffs. We have to recognize, and I think we all do, the United States economy is more than 10 times the size of the Canadian economy. And the principle in terms of our counter tariffs is to have maximum impact in the United States, as I said a moment ago, minimum impact here. So we have to think about the impact on Canadian businesses. I'll give you one example, if I may. In the auto sector, the way we've designed those auto tariffs is that Canadian automakers, if they maintain production here, if they maintain their investments here, when I say Canadian automakers, I mean automakers that have jobs and plants and production in Canada, then they can have lower tariffs on what they ship to the United States. We create a huge incentive for them in order to do that. We also have carved out the Canadian auto parts sector. Last point, I know you're pressed for time, the Canadian auto parts sector, so that it can remain competitive with the United States. We're focused on maximizing Canadian jobs, maximizing the harm in the U.S. So that we get them where we need them.
Mr. Poilievre, you want in, then Mr. Singh.
Well, Mr. Carney, you claim that you want our country to respond with strength, but after the last decade, half of which time you've been Justin Trudeau's economic advisor, our economy is weaker than ever before. It's been the worst growth in the G7. We've lost $500 billion of investment south of the border. You supported blocking pipelines in Canada that gave Donald Trump and the US a near monopoly over our energy. And now you want to keep in place Bill C-69, the liberal no new development law that blocks us from shipping our resources overseas. How could you possibly think it's a good idea to give the Americans a continued monopoly on our energy projects when you have seen how much these liberal policies have weakened our country over the last decade?
Let Mr. Carney respond, and then Mr. Singh.
Sure. If I may, yes. So let's go to my record. My record is a month long as Prime Minister. and this goes to the heart of coming to the Americans with strength, but doing the right thing for Canada. Within the first week as Prime Minister, I sat down with all the premiers of the provinces and territories, as well as the leaders of the Indigenous peoples. Got an agreement with all the provinces and territories, doesn't happen very often, got an agreement for them to have one Canadian economy instead of 13, first point. Secondly, to commit the federal government to do its part by Canada Day, so free trade in Canada by Canada Day. Thirdly, the federal government to commit with respect to project review.
The question was about pipelines.
I'm getting to it. Thirdly, one project, one review, and relying
That's
on provincial. Yes, it is possible under our system.
No,
it is the impact assessment. It is agreed on under the impact assessment framework. And we have a cooperation agreement with British Columbia already. We're looking forward to them with the other provinces. We will move forward.
Of course, we agree around having a strategic response to the United States. But what I'm concerned about is what we're doing here in Canada. We are already seeing threats to our country in that just the threats alone of the tariffs have meant Canadians have lost their jobs. The threats of the tariffs that are in place right now, the impact of those tariffs is that we've lost jobs in steel, aluminum, and the auto sector. People are already losing their jobs. And while Mr. Carney, you had time, as you mentioned, not very long time, but as Prime Minister, you showed us your priorities. The first thing you did is you had traveled, you made a tax cut for millionaires, which was reversing on the capital gains. So you gave a tax cut to millionaires, but you didn't have time to increase the amount that workers get on EI. Right now, workers who are struggling and wondering, what am I going to do if I lose my job? Workers who've lost their job are saying, how do I pay my bills when EI only covers half of a worker's salary? Maybe 40 years ago that would have worked, but right now most workers are spending their entire salary just to pay the bills, to pay their mortgage and their rent, and to put food on the table. So EI is not good enough, and it shows Canadians that you didn't make it a priority to protect those that are impacted by these tariffs, that are threatened because their jobs are lost.
We have not heard from Monsieur Blanchet yet in this segment, so please.
Yeah, Mr. Carney, you are becoming a real Canadian leader, saying one thing in French and another one in English. You said in British Columbia in February that you would force oil and gas through pipelines through Quebec, either we wanted it or not. You would use emergency powers in order to do so. And 2 days later in Montreal, you said that you would never do that without the approval of Quebec. What's the point of using emergency powers if you do have the agreement of Quebec? However, I do agree with you. It's important to be very strong in front of Mr. Trump. However, I would keep the dollar for dollar policy. Don't be weak in front of Mr. Trump. And those counter tariffs have to be targeted. You have put out already $2 billion for Ontario auto industry, car industry, and the lumberwood industry in Quebec has already paid to United States $2 billion, and you have not raised one finger in order to help us.
Let's get from Mr. Poilievre and then a response from Mr. Carney.
Well, Mr. Carney refused to answer the question about pipelines. Just the other day, he said that he doesn't necessarily think we need to build pipelines. Let me tell you what that means. Right now, the Americans get 97% of our oil, 100% of our natural gas exports at big discounts. We have to send Canadian oil from Western Canada through the States just to get it back to Quebec because we don't have a pipeline. And now there's this law, Liberal Law C-69, which effectively bans pipelines. The 14 biggest energy and resource companies say it has to go if we're ever going to build another project. And I asked Mr. Carney why he would keep in place this anti-pipeline law that effectively empowers Donald Trump to have a total monopoly on our single biggest export. Why would you not repeal this liberal law? Isn't it because you are exactly the same in the same line as Justin Trudeau and the rest of the liberal team that is now making up your cabinet?
Let's get a response.
Well, let me pick up a couple of points that have been made. The first thing I did as Prime Minister was to cut the carbon tax. That's the first thing. Second thing is made a commitment that all proceeds from our tariffs will go to workers and those companies most affected. There were several points raised.
So far.
If I may, Mr. Steve, if I may address, I'm trying to do it quickly because several points raised. All proceeds go to workers and the firms most effective, and those proceeds are considerable. Third thing, I'm interested in solutions. I'm interested in getting energy infrastructure built. That means pipelines, that means carbon capture storage, that means electricity grids. And here's how you do it. And we've already moved in the first month. Cooperation agreements with the provinces. Guess what? We are a federation. You need to cooperate with Quebec. You need to cooperate with the provinces. You need to get First Nations and Indigenous people buy-in. You can do that through the one project, one review window that we put in place at that first ministers meeting, as well as, if necessary, using emergency powers to fulfill the federal responsibility, but not the unique.
Mr. Poilievre, you want to come back on that?
What you're saying, Mr. Carney, with respect, is a total contradiction. The No New Development Law, C-69, guarantees there will not be one-stop shop because it requires the government of Canada to actually duplicate the same project.
Have no regulation.
Have one-stop shop.
Mr. Singh, we just got to let him finish his sentence. Let's just let him finish his sentence.
That is not true. In fact, Mr. Singh, the reality is we should have strong rules enforced once. We shouldn't have multiple levels of referral that it takes now 17 years to get a major project approved in this country. That is why in the last 10 years, we've had the worst economic growth in the entire G7. We cannot afford a fourth Liberal term. We need a change, and the Conservative plan for a change will include repealing the anti-pipeline law so we can get our energy to markets other than the United States.
Mr. Singh, then Mr. Carney.
While these two compete about who's more pro-pipeline, I think what we need to do is, I mean, it's clear. The Liberals bought a pipeline. They built a pipeline. I don't know what Pierre is complaining about. That's what they did. I think what we need to do, if we're talking about energy in our country, we need to build an east-west grid. Let's use our power as a nation to build a national project that creates good jobs, that strengthens us for the future, where we connect the low-cost energy from jurisdictions and provinces across this beautiful land and have low-cost energy for businesses, for people, so we can build a stronger economy. That's the energy of the future that we need.
Mr. Carney.
3 quick points. First, the pipeline built, yes, TMX built. That's why oil exports up 50% over the course of the last few years. Secondly, I don't think Mr. Singh is absolutely right about the east-west grid interconnections, which is part of the energy corridor. Huge opportunities for this country. We have to be able to do more than one thing. Third point, fundamental point. We can give ourselves far more than Donald Trump can ever take away. If we have one Canadian economy, not 13, and if we just look at that agreement we got with the provinces, look at what Ontario and Nova Scotia have just announced in terms of their steps towards this. This is within our grasp.
Monsieur Blanchet, what should we be prepared to concede in our negotiations with the United States?
I want to be back to something that Mr. Carney said. You can't do something and the opposite, and you can't fill people's mind with nonsense. Quebec has, by law, its own environmental review institution, and you cannot, through a federal decision, even through a Quebec government decision, go over the BAP, as we call it. If the BAP says no, she said it's no.
I know.
Good.
I know,
Let's
but this
keep
is
that in mind.
This is the point. This is, if I may, this is the point. The federal government can do the following, which is to take the decision to abide by the decision of the Quebec BAP. That is within the federal government's power. That is known as cooperative federalism. That's what we need to do.
And do you understand one other point?
This is what we need. This is what we need to do in a crisis.
We have Moïse and then Mr. Poilievre.
Yeah. The building of those pipelines will take at least 10 to 14 years. Mr. Trump will be 90 years old, not president no more, and somebody of course less terrible will be there before you can even dream of having oil through this pipeline of yours.
We're less than a minute to go. Mr. Poilievre, I promised you next.
Listen, after the last 10 years of Liberals blocking pipelines and killing jobs,
Sounds wild when you
we
say that.
actually need to get things done. We need a change, and our Conservative plan for change will repeal the No New Pipelines law. It will create a true one-stop shop, set up shovel-ready zones with pre-permitting so that we can approve LNG liquefaction export plants, mines, pipelines, nuclear plants, and also hydroelectric dams so that we can generate the power we need to be strong, self-reliant, and stand on our own 2
Can I-
feet for change.
Last quick word to Mr. Carney.
Okay, quick word. Bringing it back to what we're talking about, which is tariffs, the threats to Canada, how to negotiate. We need these options. We need these options to build domestically, to build one Canadian economy. We need to act. We need to diversify our trade partners.
And that
will give us strength to the U.S.
That is our time. Okay, you know my job.
That was quite long,
Yes.
but I thought it was important that we needed the whole context. Now, before we move into our discussion, there's several things that need to be brought up. So the first point is that Bill C-69 was adopted in 2019. This will be important in a minute. It gave the federal government the authority to assess how resource development projects, like pipelines, would impact climate change and Indigenous rights. So and this is where this is important. Pretty much all of the examples that Poilievre blamed on C-69 were canceled long before the law was ever a thing. So if we look at the Dunkirk oil sands project, that was canceled in 2016, 3 years before C-69 was passed. Northern Gateway was another one he talked about. That was rejected by the federal cabinet in 2016, again, pre-C-69. The LNG project was rejected by Quebec in 2021. Energy East pipeline canceled by the company, not because of Bill C-69. So I thought that was really important to make. And then there's just a couple other things. One, blah, blah, blah. Oh, yes. So Carney was accused of saying one thing about pipelines outside Quebec and the opposite inside of Quebec. And so I wanted to dig into this a little further just to figure out, for the purposes of our discussion. Again, it goes back to the numbers thing, right? So in February, Carney said he would use all federal powers, including emergency powers, to accelerate major projects such as pipelines, trade corridors, and clean energy. Later that same month, he said to CBC that the projects would be done in consultation with all provinces and First Nations. And this is important. Then to Radio Canada, he said he would never force a pipeline through Quebec without its approval. And then in April, he said we must choose a few projects, not necessarily pipelines, maybe pipelines, we'll see. So there is some validity to like the back and forth of Carney. And then I also wanted to say, because Poilievre brought up the recession thing. Sorry, I'm just reading from my notes because I wanted to make sure it was clear. Okay, so the claim was that Carney said that in the debates that when he was governor Bank of Canada in the 2008 crisis, Canada avoided a recession. So let's look at Stats Canada real quickly. So Canada's GDP dropped for 3 consecutive quarters during the 2008-2009 year. 2 quarters of GDP decline equals a recession by definition. In December 2008, Carney told the Canadian press, we were in a recession. February 2009, Carney told the House of Commons Finance Committee the same thing. Quote, we are now in a recession with GDP projected to fall by 1.2% this year. So yes, Canada handled the 2008 crash better than the US, but by no means did we skip the recession altogether. So I did want to make sure that we were all clear. And again, this just goes to the fact that like you need to dig deeper than what people are saying. But I thought that since this is like the main political point, this is the main campaign issue, it was worth a listen. So German, go.
Yeah, there's quite a bit to unpack in this situation.
Oh my.
I'll talk about the pipeline situation first, and I'll work my way down to others. The fact that Pierre Poilievre is blaming C-69, as we know and we know it didn't exist at that time, doesn't even make sense. So that's my first point. It seems like he's finding somewhere to blame and somewhere to throw accusations on to. And if you don't read beyond the dates, you would never even think a second of it. So I think that's the first point that needs to be made. You can see he's trying to find a place to throw mud, and he's definitely, and for some people it will be something that they will, yeah, we will stick, and people will vote
stick in
based on
Alberta
that.
for sure.
It would stick, definitely. And if it's Alberta, like you said, for sure it would definitely stick. That's the first point. The second point on this thing is that, honestly, like, a lot of these things, when you talk about these different pipeline projects being canceled because of the company and whatever, that wasn't the government's fault necessarily. So you can't really blame the government at the time.
Well, and they specifically said that it was economic reasons, not regulation.
Yeah, and so like
statement.
you can't blame the fact that it was the government. So it's like, when you think about it, you're blaming something on something happened when it didn't even happen yet. So it doesn't make sense for something, when you talk about a 2019 law for projects that was axed in 2016. So it's like a bit of a annoying situation, and it doesn't make sense. In terms of like these pipeline projects, they would be judged based on other stuff, like other regulations that were happened pre-existing. So that's a big issue. The second point I want to make about like Carney making things on messaging about pipelines, that is a little bit kind of hard to kind of accept. There's some wishy-washiness there. There's some stuff that doesn't make sense. There's some stuff that he's just not committing now all of a sudden, And I get that he wants to kind of get the Quebec vote, but he's kind of not being clear on his stuff anymore.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, he's, in this instance on this topic, he's running into the same problem that Pierre Poilievre is with Trump. And that is that Carney is trying to play to the center, but he needs Quebecers.
Mm-hmm.
And he kind of also needs some more centrist, center-right, you would even argue. There's some votes he's looking to snag in both Alberta and BC and Saskatchewan, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think he has a similar problem around the message on this issue that Pierre Poilievre has had this whole campaign with Trump. The difference, of course, being luckily for Mark Carney and not so lucky for Pierre Poilievre, the main issue is Trump and not pipelines.
Yeah, and I think people have to also realize that, like, that's the problem when you're in a place like Canada. You have to be very careful on how you say things for different places across the country, because if you force a pipeline through Quebec is not going to vote for you.
You're done.
And you're done in the election. So at the same time, Mark Carney is trying to tread lightly, but at the same time,
although Pierre Poilievre will 100% do that because everybody hates him in Quebec anyway.
Yeah, like for him, but Mark Carney wants to actually be the prime minister with a majority government. So he's treading lightly, but at the same time, it's making him seem wishy-washy, making maybe lying at times, making all these things look like he doesn't know what he's talking about, which is a problem for voters. Voters are confused again. Like, we talked about the confusion part. And
they did a good job attacking him there.
And they definitely did. So that's on that point. In terms of the recession that didn't apparently did not happen, that's another problem too. It's like skewing the truth to make you look better than the situation that we were in. And
there were quotes. There are quotes from you talking to the media, buddy. It's like Harper saying that he never liked Carney, but unfortunately for your Harper, there's like a press release of his on the Government of Canada website from November 4th, 2011, being like, I'm pleased that this is happening. This is awesome. And then there's also a record of him offering Mark Carney his finance position, right? So
yeah,
but there's also records of this stuff, people.
That's the difference, right? I feel like these politicians, when they want to get elected, they want to be in power. They say things that sometimes are factually or a bit skewed and fuzzy.
It's crazy to me, though. Like, do you remember? We have video recording people. Like,
yeah, and I think that's the thing. You have to dive into these something. I think the moral of this podcast, if you want to put it this way, is to dive into things.
Yeah.
Because like, what people say and what people do are totally different things, but at the same time, you have to realize that politicians are going to not say things, and they're going to say things based on certain country parts and regions and provinces. But you really have to dive into it. Yes, no politician, no person will ever say things how you think it will be, but they will also skew it towards how they believe. We've seen that with all of the politicians. And so I think the moral of the story in this situation is that you really have to dive into it, and you have to understand where things are, and you have to see whether you can live by him lying that fact that Canada avoided a recession, for example, or the fact that he's wishy-washy on a pipeline project. Do you think what's more important for your psyche and what's important for your values and what you want in a government? And so, yes, that's not the policy side of it. The policy side is that it's not great in terms of like hearing these kind of contradictory statements, but at the same time, the practical applicational based thing is you need to understand what they stand for, and you have to dive more than what's being said, because there's no way that these situations would, if you vote them based on what they're saying, you actually have to see what they're actually going to follow through with. And that's the problem right now people are having, is because it's like you want to try a car, but you're not testing the car. Right? And you're saying this is what the car is from someone else. Until you test drive this car, you're not really going to understand whether you like the car either. So it's like you have to really see whether this is the person and the party you want to support. But does it look good? Not for either leaders. Any leader.
Yeah. Well, and I think it was kind of interesting because this was a section that was called, and this is kind of why I wanted to play the whole thing, is because it was supposed to be on like Trump and tariffs. And I think all of the other parties did, like particularly Poilievre did a really good job of kind of moving away from Trump and forcing Carney to kind of keep coming back to it. Because that whole conversation did end up being about like pipeline. Like, how did we go from tariffs to pipelines, right? And I think that there is that interconnection there of doing more in Canada. They didn't directly talk about interprovincial trade barriers, which was a little disappointing to me, because one of the big things that Mark Carney has talked about throughout this campaign is breaking down interprovincial trade barriers, and none of them really addressed that. Yes, Mark Carney said that he had a couple of cooperation agreements in place with BC, but like they didn't really talk about that issue. And I think if your government is going to be relying bigly, as Trump would say, on breaking down those interprovincial trade barriers, you need to give a little bit of a plan of what that'll look like. Because, well, I don't really like Poilievre. He's not, him and was it the Bloc that was talking about how long it takes to get pipelines? Like, they're not wrong. It takes like 14, 15 years. Sometimes it's just like the regulation process. Sometimes you just talk about things for 20 years.
Yeah,
so how are you going to do that? How are you going to, because there's two big hurdles here. BC for pipelines, and then Quebec basically on everything, because there's, especially economically, like a lot of provinces don't have products sold in Quebec because they don't meet the language laws of packaging and stuff. So like, those are like the details I'm interested in. Like, you say that you want your response to Trump to be reciprocal tariffs, diversifying trade, which that's kind of a no-brainer. He has major connections economically with all different leaders in Europe because of his time over there. Mm-hmm. So I'm not really worried about that. Where he lacks is, how the hell do you plan on breaking into these interprovincial trade barriers? There's a reason why every time a crisis happens, it comes up and then it goes away, basically right after an election, because it is much easier said than done to bring Canada's economy from 13 individual economies to one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a problem, right? And that's a big problem. That's why people don't trust these politicians anyway. Yeah. And so I think people have to really dive into it. And I get why they say it, because they need to get these votes at the same time. But it makes politicians like being lying and being not honest and skewing the truth to an political optimist or whatever that word is called, right? So we have to be very careful as people just to understand these things. And I think that's with everyone. So you cannot just take politicians at what they say. You actually have to understand what they stand for, I think is number one. So it's really, really tough. I get it. But at the same time, people need to be very, very careful on who they vote for. And yes, we don't share the same.
Canada.
Yeah, and like, and I think if they say they're going to do something, most of the time they're right, but at the same time they may not, right? So that's a problem as well.
Right.
So I think they all flip flop regardless, and so you really need to cut through, pardon me, the BS part of stuff and the talking points of what they say and actually if they do it, and actually pay attention to those things, because that technically tells you their history, but also tells you where they stand on issues that are important. And in terms of pipeline projects take years to build, just like any type of construction. So that's something that's a really big problem. There's so much regulation involved in these things.
Right. So I guess with that said, just before we move into polls, I just want to check here. So what, as sort of, I guess, like, fine. Well, no, let's do polls first. Sorry, I'm flip-flopping. Polls didn't change very much. This was updated today, this morning. Liberals are down. NDP are up slightly, like tiny bit. They're projected 9 seats in 338 Canada's projections. It's the Bloc that seemed to kind of win out a tiny bit. The Conservatives haven't moved at all. They've been sitting at 126 seats for like 2 weeks now. CBC poll tracker, which, a reminder to people, the reason why we look at this one is because it's an average of all of the polls, and they weight more heavily polls that are more recent. So if we look at this was updated yesterday. Liberals are down, Conservatives are down, NDP overall are like the same. It's the Bloc that kind of won out in these debates. And I think he did a really good job of like sort of butting his head in when he did, about like, okay, but like, are you just going to ignore what Quebec wants?
Yeah,
so, like,
and I think so. And I think that's what the resounding is saying. And I think that's what we can agree to, is that the Bloc did a lot better than people probably thought. And the others, like, I think the resounding was people saying that the NDP did horrible, right? He interrupted, he was desperate.
He's desperate, yeah. But he did go up a little bit, if you, not according to like the average, but like if 338's right, he did go up a little bit. And I wonder if that's less a result though of the debate and more a result of, well, the Liberals are going to win, so I can vote the way I would normally vote.
Yeah, and I honestly, I think people, like, when people ask whether the debate really made a difference, it's I don't know. It's probably the right answer, right?
Yeah.
Right? Do I think that, Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre flop? Probably not, right? But did Jagmeet Singh more flop than them? Definitely, right? But at the same time, it looks like that the others, especially when I'm referring to Quebecois, PQ, they definitely did a lot better, and that probably was from the debate.
Yeah. Oh, I think that even that slight turn of a few seats was 100% the French and English debates. He did a very good job. Even in the English debate, he did stumble a few times over, words, but I'm sure Mark Carney was not great in French. So, okay, so who do you think kind of did the best, or like who surprised you? I know for me, it was Poilievre, and that's because I really didn't think that he would be able to control himself for 4 hours, not even 2, for 4 hours, 2 nights back to back, his attack dog, and like being able to show kind of a little bit of a more human side. Again, I'm not sure if that's going to make a difference to Canadians. I think he's fighting his 20 years of him being him. But I think for me, Poilievre was definitely a little bit of a surprise. And he did a good job in a couple spots. Like, yes, one of them was Mark Carney basically handing him a win on China security clearance. But I think overall it was like what I expected from a conservative, like a Stephen Harper era conservative.
Yeah, I share that, but I also think, let me say, I think in terms of the win, I'm pretty much a toss-up between Pierre Poilievre and also Mark Carney, but for two different reasons. I'm surprised how great Mark Carney did in terms of holding his own, except for that one morning section. In terms of Pierre Poilievre, I'll talk about Pierre Poilievre first. Pierre Poilievre actually was trying to be statesman, I think, is the resounding situation.
Oh, I'm sure someone in his party was like, be a prime minister.
Which is something that we don't see very often from that guy, let alone that party right now. Yeah. So that really surprised me. Did he win? He definitely won on that he actually.
Oh, I don't think he won. That just surprised. That was my most surprising thing.
Yeah, but I think he definitely
I don't think any of them really won. If anybody won, it was the bloc.
Nobody, like I said, nobody really won necessarily in that way. But in terms of like kind of connecting, he definitely did a good job, like in that sense, right? But in terms of actually, like who was the biggest surprise? I think they both were, to be honest with you. Like they both held their own. Surprisingly, Mark Carney survived the debates, considering he has no previous debate experience in terms of running a campaign. So he did okay, right? Was it things that he needs to work on? Of course, like all of these people have stuff to work on, but surprisingly, they both survived well, right?
I think like Mark Carney was the only one that really didn't interrupt anyone and was just like, he kind of like reminds you of like the dad, right? Like, this is my policy. This is why I have it. This is my policy. This is why I have it.
Or this is my kid, and this is why I like them. Or this is why I'm proud of them. Like, and that's the thing. I think people have to realize that nobody really won the debates overall. But in terms, if you want to talk about political party winning, they can say that maybe Pierre Poilievre won in terms of like being more statesman, being more focused on things.
I think it's just more of a surprise than anything. I think if anybody won, it was the bloc.
Yeah, and like I think Brock won the overall debate, if you put it that way.
Both
for
debates.
Sure.
Like
yeah, and I think they really stood up and they really became more relevant in the conversation, right? Which is something you don't also see all the time either. So
well, I don't know that it was more like relevant. I think it was more relevant to Quebecers.
Yeah, and that's like exactly what I meant by Quebecers, right?
Yeah, like he was definitely able to be like, are you people listening to what they're saying? They're going to try to take your sovereignty. Like, I think Pierre Poilievre will ignore Quebec and do whatever he wants. I think that Carney needs to talk to Quebec, but I don't know how that will translate in actual action, right? And I think the bloc did a good job of pushing that, particularly in when they were talking about the notwithstanding clause, and he basically completely ignored Steve's question and was like, we need to talk about Quebec and the notwithstanding clause, because Quebec out of the gate has used the notwithstanding clause more than any other province since the 80s when it was introduced.
For sure. And I think that's important to realize. In terms of like winning, nobody really won the debate overall, right? Like it or not. But at the same time, did anyone flop? Not really either. Except for Jagmeet Singh, of course. We know that already.
I don't know that I think the things that he was saying probably resonated with NDP voters, but I don't think it resonated enough to get them back, because I think particularly when Poilievre's talking about taking away Canadian rights, I think that would be enough for NDP voters to be like, nope, still got to vote Carney. Can't split that vote. And so I don't know that there's much he's going to be able to do. I think in the same sense, it's the same problem as the bloc, right? People are voting for prime minister, and the prime minister is going to either be Mark Carney or Pierre Poilievre. It sucks, but like The Bloc is obviously just a Quebec party. Like, they're not national, so they're never going to be prime minister. And the NDP is facing getting their political party standing taken away.
Yeah,
So
and that's
I
the big
think
problem.
we're really in a strategic situation here.
And I think we hear that resoundingly with lots of people saying that. So at the end of the day, it's whether you want a prime minister or you want an opposition or splitting the vote, right?
Yeah. And I think
So-
it's too important. Like, I think people are really worried about Trump and they want, like, that's what they're voting on. They're voting on Pierre or Carney. And I don't think that debate really swayed.
No, not at all.
Like, Mark had that stumble at the end, but like, I don't think it was big enough. Like I said, I got lambasted on Blue Sky for my article on Carney, and people were like, "Oh, you like Poilievre?" And I was like, "Okay, you clearly don't read any of my stuff." But like, that's important, right? But like, at the end of the day, it's not important enough. And I think if this had been any other election, that story would have got a lot more traction than it did.
Definitely. And I think people have to realize that too. It's not going to kill Mark Carney's momentum right now. Not at all.
But it was terrible, and you should be worried about that. But
yeah, and it's definitely terrible. And I'm sure he's getting feedback from the people around him saying, you need to be better. And
don't say you'll give Canadians to China. We didn't realize we had to tell you that.
Yeah. And be a bit more firm on your issues too, if you can, right?
Yeah. So
but that's normal with any politician. So no, like I said, it's not going to really affect too much. And I think all the pundits you talk to and listen to, just in general, will say the same thing. It really doesn't matter. The debates don't really make a big difference right now, especially when how many millions of people have voted this week already.
Right. Okay. So with that brings us to the end of the show. This is going to go up in chunks because it's really long. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to be splitting this up into the different sections, and I'll be posting it on YouTube. So if you're listening to whatever section, this will be at the end of it. So there are going to be several other sections for our listeners' purposes. There's the introduction. There is the segment on housing, public safety, tariffs, and polling, as well as the leaders talking to each other. So check out those other ones. I am going to post this as a full podcast. So if you somehow made it to the end of that 2.5 hours, thank you. You're amazing, regardless of what side you fall on. And we are going to be talking about platforms on Wednesday. That's for sure going to be Rio and I. German's unsure if he'll be able to make it, but he might. So he may join us. He may not. We also might be doing a mini episode this week on the big story that overshadowed the debate, which was the Rebel media controversy. So be sure to check that out at the end of the week when it goes up. Other than that, vote. Voting day is Monday, the 28th.
1 week from today.
No, I can't believe it. We're gonna have certainty.
And also, if you can't vote today, because this is the 21st, not sure when you'll be listening to this, right? But because like by the time this goes up, you'll probably be voting. You can vote anytime up to, I think, sometime this week you can go into the elections office.
You can vote at any point in the elections office through the whole campaign.
So,
but you have to know who you're voting for, and it has to be your MP. Make sure you have their full name and the spelling correct.
Yes, and make sure you spell it correctly, because I know lots of people who've had trouble with that. So that's a problem. But anyway, make sure you go vote and get educated. That's all I ask. Don't just listen to us.
Look into the numbers. I think if anything, that's what this podcast showed. Look into what's being said, guys. Half truths. Okay.
Yes.
With that, we will talk to you on Wednesday. Bye, guys.
Bye.